We often imagine history as something clear-cut set in stone, recorded in textbooks, and echoed by respected scholars. But real history isn't always found in classrooms or museums. Sometimes it lies buried in dust-covered scrolls, manuscripts, and forgotten parchments, hidden in vaults untouched for centuries, guarded not by locks but by silence. And there's one place where that silence is deafening. Beneath the marble corridors of the Vatican, arguably the oldest, most influential center of religious and political power in the Western world, there exists a mysterious chamber, rarely spoken of outside hushed circles, the Vatican Secret Archives. But don't be misled by the word archives. This isn't a mere collection of holy texts. It's a vast, winding labyrinth of suppressed history, millions of documents, untouched by public eyes, cloaked in secrecy, sealed by papal decree. Among these fragile relics of the past lies something far more disturbing than forgotten theology or faded letters from saints. There exists a collection so unsettling that Vatican officials have deliberately hidden it from the world for nearly 2,000 years. These aren't myths. These are meticulously documented, truth-personal letters from emperors, military dispatches, internal memoranda, even private diaries revealing chapters of ancient history deliberately omitted from the official narrative. At the heart of these revelations is one of the most destructive events in Roman history, the Great Fire of 64 AD on a sweltering summer night in July, as the people of Rome drifted into uneasy sleep. They had no idea that within hours an inferno would consume their world. Conventional history blames the fire on accidental causes. Rickety wooden homes packed too closely together near the Circus Maximus. The blaze, we're told, spread uncontrollably for nearly a week, reducing temples, homes, shops, and public buildings to ashes and leaving hundreds of thousands homeless. But deep within the Vatican archives, a different narrative smolders beneath the official record. Tucked away in a sealed section labeled Acta Neonis, the files of Nero are confidential. Correspondences between Roman officials and the emperor's inner circle. These documents, long hidden from historians, suggest the fire was no accident. According to these records, Emperor Nero not only anticipated the inferno, he orchestrated it. Months before the blaze, Nero's secretaries and governors received carefully worded instructions that emphasized a need to reshape the city, to make Rome worthy of imperial glory. Rebuilding is mentioned frequently, but always preceded by destruction. One letter ominously concludes, "The glory of the new must rise from the ashes of the old." The documents go further. They describe how trusted men under Nero's direct command, disguised as citizens, ignited multiple fires across the city using oil-soaked torches. These strategic ignition points overwhelmed Rome's firefighting brigades and sowed chaos among the population. Multiple eyewitness scrolls describe the eerie coordination of the blaze and a strange absence of panic from imperial forces and Nero. According to the same archive, he watched from a safe distance, calmly, even theatrically gazing at the spectacle like a director admiring his magnum opus. But perhaps the most horrifying truth isn't that Nero burned his who he blamed afterward. Desperate to avoid suspicion, Nero turned his wrath toward a growing but vulnerable group, the Christians. At the time, Christianity was still a fringe movement, misunderstood and mistrusted by the Roman elite. According to letters preserved in the Vatican, a private meeting was convened days after the fire. Nero and his advisors agreed the Christians would be framed, What followed was one of the most brutal crackdowns in ancient history. The documents recount, in excruciating detail, how thousands of innocent men, women, and children were arrested, tortured, and executed. Some were torn apart by wild animals in public arenas. Others were crucified along city roads. Still more were coated in pitch and set ablaze human torches lighting Rome's streets at night. A chilling report from a Roman prefect reads, "We no longer execute criminals. We sacrifice scapegoats." The Vatican's secret files don't just recount these horrors, they immortalize them. One of the most haunting texts among them is titled Annales Secreta Neronis, the secret chronicles of Nero, believed to be written by the emperor's personal scribe. It offers a near-daily record of events during Nero's reign. Within its pages are reflections not only on the fire and the persecution that followed, but also on Nero's own descent into theatrical madness and cruelty masked as statecraft. This account transforms the Great Fire from a tragic accident into a calculated, state-sponsored catastrophe, one that reshaped Rome and set a dark precedent. That political power, when unchecked, will burn anything in its path to preserve its image. And what's more disturbing, this wasn't the last time truth was buried to protect power. It was only the beginning. So as we begin to peel back the layers of this hidden chapter, ask yourself, are you ready to face the version of history that was never meant to survive? The version that whispers from beneath locked vaults and yellowing scrolls. The version that redefines our understanding of faith, power, and manipulation. Because once you've seen what lies in the shadows of the Vatican archives, there is no turning back. Take a deep breath. We are about to uncover the secrets that Rome and the world were never meant to remember, but never publicly released. According to these long-suppressed records, just days after the fire, while smoke still smothered the skyline of Rome, Emperor Nero secretly summoned the empire's finest architects to his private palace. Behind closed doors, he issued a startling command: begin immediate preparations to rebuild the city into a bold new capital he intended to name Neropolis. Ambitious sketches preserved within these hidden files depict a Rome unlike anything before: grandeur, more orderly, with sweeping avenues, vast public squares, and towering monuments. But one deeply unsettling pattern emerges. The proposed redevelopment zones align with uncanny precision to the very neighborhoods most ravaged by the fire, as if their destruction had been deliberate, calculated erasure designed to make way for Nero's imperial vision. One chilling entry from an architect's private diary stands out. As Nero examined the blueprints, he reportedly murmured a cryptic phrase: "To build paradise, sometimes we must first pass through hell." This line alone has become the cornerstone of a theory darker than anything recorded in the official histories, that Nero not only anticipated the fire, but masterminded it. And yet, buried deeper in these secret Vatican archives lies a more complex portrayal of Nero's psyche. Personal correspondence between the emperor and his closest confidants, including Empress Papogia Sabina and the philosopher Seneca, reveals a tortured mind unraveling in the fire's aftermath. In a private letter to Seneca, hidden for centuries beneath Vatican stone, Nero writes, "Rome is burning, but perhaps it's my own soul that's truly aflame. What have I done to my people? Will history remember me as a builder, or curse me as a butcher?" But irony twisted the fate of even Seneca himself. Despite being a moral compass to the emperor and one of Rome's most respected thinkers, he too was forced by Nero's own decree to take his own life. This contradiction invites an unsettling question. Was Nero truly remorseful, or simply a master manipulator crafting his legacy, even as the city's ashes cooled? Whatever his motives, the documents make one thing clear. Nero's scapegoating of Christians was no spontaneous act, it was a carefully orchestrated campaign. In a climate of fear, grief, and rage, the Roman populace accepted Nero's lie. Christians were blamed for the fire, and the first state-sponsored persecution began, brutal, merciless, and Ironically, this act of cruelty sowed the seeds for something Nero could never have foreseen. That very persecution forged Christianity into a symbol of spiritual defiance and unbreakable faith. It would one day reshape the destiny of Western civilization. Another document, dated 68 AD, the year of Nero's death, details how his successors quietly moved to erase all records tying the fire to imperial planning. Yet some scrolls, letters, and first-hand testimonies survived the purge. They were smuggled, copied, and eventually sealed away in the deepest layers of the Vatican Archives, which raises a profound question. Why would the Catholic Church, an institution that would go on to become one of the most powerful forces in human history, take such great pains to hide these materials? Was it because these revelations threatened to destabilize the very narrative on which their own authority was built? A narrative carefully curated over centuries. These crumbling, forgotten pages beneath Vatican City whisper a dangerous truth, and what we've uncovered here is only the beginning. What else waits in the shadows? Take another step into the darkness, because this journey has only just begun. As the fires of Rome were finally extinguished, leaving behind charred ruins and a grieving population, something even more unsettling stirred behind the curtains of power. The Vatican's most secret records suggest that Nero and Rome's elite didn't merely gamble with the city's fate for political gain. They were also deeply involved in arcane mystical practices far beyond what conventional history dares mention. Among the most alarming documents are those detailing Mithraism, secretive cult that flourished among Roman soldiers and aristocrats. Today, much of what we know about Mithraism is fragmented, because its temples, symbols, and writings were systematically destroyed or hidden. The Vatican Archives reportedly contain the most complete surviving records, documents kept under lock and key for nearly 2,000 years. Contrary to the belief that Mithraism was a benign spiritual tradition, the documents paint a far darker picture. Behind stone walls and beneath the streets of ancient Rome, cult members engaged in terrifying rituals, blood rites, sacrifices, both animal and, on occasion, human. And according to several classified scrolls, these rituals weren't performed by fringe devotees, but by Rome's highest figures, including Nero himself and later emperors. But before we descend deeper into these shadows, it's vital to understand what Mithraism was. Mithraism, a Persian deity, was introduced into Rome by legions returning from campaigns in the east. He was revered as the god of the sun, of victory, and of eternal life. Mithraism's core appeal lay in its promise of divine strength, immortality through blood, conquest through ritual. This made it especially popular among warriors and political elites. According to ancient descriptions, Mithraic temples, known as Mithraea, were always built underground. Cold, dark sanctuaries carved beneath bustling cities or buried within remote military forts. Inside, carved murals and statues depicted Mithra slaying a bull, symbolic centerpiece of the cult, representing death, rebirth, and the power to conquer fate itself. But Vatican-held documents leaked in recent years suggests that this ritual wasn't merely symbolic. One Latin manuscript from the 2nd century AD, ominously titled Mysterium Sanguinis, Mithra, Mystery of Mithras Blood Details, a series of horrifying initiation rites. According to its pages, initiates were blindfolded, led deep into hidden chambers, and forced to drink warm blood from silver chalices. They witnessed live sacrifices animals, and in the most secret ceremonies, human lives extinguished by fire or blade, offered in exchange for divine favor. Chanting echoed through these stone catacombs. Prayers were whispered in forgotten languages. Blood dripped across temple floors as the empire's most powerful men sought immortality in the shadows. These aren't legends. They are records preserved in ink, parchment, and silence, hidden beneath Vatican marble, waiting for someone to listen. Asterisk, they believed that drinking blood would infuse them with the divine strength of Mithra, transforming ordinary men into invincible warriors. These weren't just rituals, they were intimate acts of power and possession, performed in the shadows before major military campaigns. And in the most secretive of these ceremonies, human sacrifice wasn't just rumored, it was real, always concealed, never openly recorded. But some truths still managed to survive. Among the most chilling documents hidden in the depths of the Vatican archives is a letter written by a Roman official in the 3rd century. It describes, in harrowing detail, a human sacrifice conducted in a Mithraic temple just outside Rome. According to the account, the victims, typically young, healthy slaves or captured prisoners of war, were bound tightly to a stone altar. There, under flickering torchlight, a high priest carried out the ritual using a curved blade, while fellow initiates chanted feverishly, invoking Mithra's divine blessing. But these were not mere religious rites. They were profoundly political. Instruments, Mithraism served as a psychological engine of control within the Roman elite. It forged obedience through fear and loyalty through sacred violence. It shaped a generation of Roman soldiers and commanders who genuinely believed they were guided by the hand of Mithra, himself willing to fight, kill, and die without question. This, perhaps more than the blood rituals themselves, is what terrified the early Christian Church. When the Vatican rose to power, the documents detailing Mithraism weren't simply hidden because they were gruesome. They were hidden because they posed a direct threat to the moral authority the Church was so carefully constructing. Mithraism exposed a dark and ancient truth, that the divine, in Rome's eyes, had long been associated not with peace, but with conquest, blood, and absolute submission. By the 4th century, under Emperor Constantine, Christianity became the state religion and Mithraism was swiftly, brutally erased. Mithraic temples were demolished or sealed off. Followers were executed or forced to convert. Every sacred object, scroll, and record was seized. Many of them moved into deep storage under Vatican control. For the Church, Mithraism wasn't just heresy. It was a dangerous mirror, reflecting a savage version of humanity that had to be hidden beneath a veneer of salvation and divine grace. One letter from a high-ranking church official in the 5th century, still preserved in the archives, chillingly states, "The rites of Mithra must remain buried, not solely to protect the faithful, but to obscure the horrifying truth that even the most civilized men once worshipped their gods through murder and pain." Some documents did survive long enough to be copied or leaked. Among them was an ancient Greek text known as the Libra Mithra, or Book of Mithra. It describes in vivid detail the initiation rituals imposed on Roman soldiers. Initiates underwent 7 harrowing stages each, more symbolic, brutal, and psychologically transformative than the last. At the final stage, called Potter, the Father, initiate would be required to participate in live sacrifice, sometimes personally delivering the killing blow, pledging full allegiance through blood. The imagery wasn't metaphorical. It was direct and raw. Hidden frescoes and stone carvings, now stored deep within the Vatican, depict Mithra slaying the sacred bull, followers drinking from blood-filled chalices, and most disturbingly explicit representations of human sacrifice. These were not symbolic rites. They were instructional scenes, etched in secrecy beneath ground-level temples, meant to guide and preserve a system of sacred violence. Scholars granted rare glimpses into these archives have spoken of their emotional toll. One historian described the imagery as viscerally disturbing. Another simply wrote, "Even by the brutal standards of ancient religion, these rituals are almost incomprehensibly violent." The Church's decision to bury them makes complete sense, but that raises a larger question. How did Mithraism, once a dominant force in the Roman world, disappear so completely? Was it the Christian persecution alone, or was something more complex at work? According to confidential Vatican records, Mithraism's downfall wasn't just religious, it was political. The same qualities that made it attractive to emperors, its power to shape minds, forge loyalty, and create obedient soldiers, also made it inherently volatile. As Rome descended into internal turmoil, the cult's deeply rooted ties to military power began to worry the very leaders it had once served. There are documents suggesting that after Nero, a series of emperors began to view Mithraism as a double sword. It could unify legions, but it could also inspire rebellion, assassination plots, and dangerous forms of fanaticism. One emperor in particular, Theodosius I, took extreme measures. According to secret records preserved in the Vatican, he issued direct orders for the systematic destruction of all Mithraic temples across the empire. Special military units were dispatched to hunt down high-ranking Mithraic priests. Manuscripts were burned, ritual objects were melted or buried, and whatever could not be destroyed was shipped quietly to Rome and sealed within the Vatican archives never to see daylight again. And thus, Mithraism faded, not with a loud collapse, but with a whisper. It became a ghost religion, remembered only in fragments, in forgotten caves, scattered sculptures, and suppressed texts. A phantom faith that once held the loyalty of Rome's mightiest legions, now locked in darkness by those who feared what its truth could reveal. But blood rituals and imperial conspiracies are only the beginning. As we delve deeper into the Vatican's hidden corridors, we come face to face with a far more familiar story, one that shaped the world. But this time, it's told from a perspective never shared in public. Not the gospel account, but an ancient dossier the Vatican has long tried to suppress. In a quiet, restricted vault beneath layers of stone and iron, there lies a collection of sealed scrolls labeled Acta Palati, the Pilate Files. These aren't mythical texts or recent discoveries. They've been in the Church's possession for nearly 2,000 years, kept away from historians and theologians alike. And what they contain could alter everything we think we know about the trial, the crucifixion, and the political storm that surrounded the final days of Jesus Christ. The next door is opening, and behind it, truth waits. Authored by scribes under the direct authority of Pontius Pilate, the Roman governor of Judea during the early 1st century. These secret files offer a stunning re-examination of one of the most pivotal moments in human history. Pontius Pilate has long been portrayed as a reluctant figure in the crucifixion of Jesus Christ. In the Gospels, he is cast as a passive administrator, indifferent, uncertain, and swayed by the cries of an angry crowd. But these confidential records reveal a very different Pilate, a calculating strategist, a Roman loyalist, and above all, a man deeply concerned with preserving order in a region infamous for its unrest. Written in a mixture of Latin and Greek. One particular report, dispatched directly to Emperor Tiberius shortly after the crucifixion, paints a stark and sobering picture. In this detailed communication, Pilate justifies his decision to execute Jesus of Nazareth not as a reluctant concession, but as a deliberate political act. According to the document, Jesus was seen not simply as a spiritualder, but as a potential catalyst for mass resistance. Pilate had monitored Jesus for months through spies and informants, noting with growing concern the subversive language in his teachings, especially the phrase, "King of the Jews," which, from a Roman perspective, was nothing short of treason. Pilate writes, Jesus of Nazareth was not merely an innocent prophet, but the center of a political movement that, if unchecked, could provoke widespread revolt against Roman rule. Pilate feared that if he failed to act decisively, Judaeal ruddy volatilk erupt into open rebellion. In his view, the crucifixion was a preventative measure, not just a religious appeasement, but a strategic message. Rome does not tolerate threats, divine or otherwise. The document also details the immense pressure Pilate faced from both the Sanhedrin, the local Jewish leadership, and high-ranking Roman officials in Syria and Rome. A single misstep could end his governorship. Or worse. The decision to execute Jesus was, in Pilate's own words, a necessary sacrifice for the sake of imperial peace. But if this was purely a political act, one must ask, why has the Vatican worked so meticulously to suppress these records? The answer lies in the tension between historical fact and theological narrative. For nearly 2 millennia, the Church has centered the crucifixion as a divine act of cosmic redemption, a sacred event transcending politics and rooted in divine will. But Pilate's report threatens to reframe it as something far more human, a cold political maneuver to protect Roman dominion. These secret Vatican files reveal internal debates within the early Church. Some voices argued that Pilate's writings should be destroyed, too dangerous to survive. Others insisted they must be preserved, however troubling, as essential pieces of historical truth. Eventually, the Vatican reached a compromise. The documents would be preserved but sealed indefinitely, accessible only to a handful of scholars under strict supervision. This is why they still exist today yet remain hidden from public view. Among the most compelling revelations is a detailed account of the private interrogation between Pilate and Jesus, an exchange barely touched upon in the Bible, but described in full within these ancient scrolls. According to the records, the encounter was not brief, but long and intense. Pilate questioned Jesus not only about his teachings, but also about the nature of power, sovereignty, and truth. He asked directly, "Are you plotting against Caesar? What does it mean to call yourself King of the Jews?" Jesus' response was quiet, yet profound. "My kingdom is not of this world. My power does not come from fear or conquest, but from truth." Pilate was shaken, not by blasphemy, but by something more dangerous: ideology. To a Roman governor, truth that did not originate from Caesar was subversion. In Pilate's eyes, Jesus represented not an armed rebellion, but a movement capable of eroding the foundations of imperial control through moral influence. In his final report to Tiberius, Pilate concludes that Jesus' death was essential not because he wielded weapons, but because his words alone could ignite revolution. Asterisk, he carries no sword, Pilate wrote, but his voice is more dangerous than 10,000 soldiers. These documents not only reframe the crucifixion, they reveal the delicate dance between religious ideology and political dominance in the Roman world. Rome tolerated gods. What it did not tolerate was dissent, and herein lies the Vatican's long-standing fear. If the global faithful were to view the crucifixion not as a divine act of salvation, but as a calculated political execution, the meaning of the cross itself might shift from sacred sacrifice to state suppression. Such a revelation could destabilize the very spiritual foundation upon which the Church has stood for centuries. One 4th century letter found alongside Pilate's files shows how serious these fears were. A high-ranking bishop warns, "Let these records not fall into the hands of the unprepared." The mystery of salvation must not be reduced to the logic of men. And yet, by preserving the documents in secret, the Church ensured their survival, perhaps sensing that the time would come when truth, no matter how controversial, must be faced. So we are left with the question, who was Jesus to Pilate? A prophet, a revolutionary, or a threat too dangerous to leave alive? These ancient pages sealed for nearly 2,000 years beneath the marble vaults of the Vatican do not offer simple answers, but they whisper a truth far more complex than legend, theology, or myth. A truth the world may finally be ready to hear. Pope Demas I once wrote words so chilling in their honesty that they have echoed for centuries within the marble halls of the Vatican. We are not protecting Pilate. We are protecting the greater truth upon which the Church is built. The world requires faith absolute, unshaken by documents rooted in earthly politics. That statement alone explains why the Vatican has gone to extraordinary lengths to ensure that the Pilate files enchant records chronicling the execution of Jesus Christ from the Roman governor's own perspective remain locked away in the most secure sections of the Vatican archives. These files are not open to public view. Scholars who are granted access must do so under strict supervision. Every page is numbered. No notes may be taken. No copies allowed. The walls themselves seem to whisper, read, but do not remember. And yet, the more tightly these documents are concealed, the more curious the world becomes. Why must an event so central to Christianity, an event that forms the very foundation of Western faith, remain sealed in shadows? What is the Church truly protecting, the truth or its image? The reality is sobering. Even if these ancient records do not alter the spiritual convictions of billions, they force us to ask deeper, more dangerous questions. What if the truth we know is only a sliver of a much broader, more complex story? What if the death of Christ, as understood through the official narrative, has been cleansed of the raw, brutal politics that surrounded it? These are not questions of faith, they are questions of history and of power. And just when we think the shadows of the Vatican archives couldn't grow darker, we descend further. Beyond the theological scrolls and political decrees, sealed in vaults, accessible only to a handful of archivists, are documents so grotesque that even the most seasoned scholars recoil upon reading them. These are not records of faith but of suffering, medical records, anatomical texts, lab notes, if they can even be called that, all dating back to ancient Rome. At the heart of this horrifying trove is a name revered in Western medicine, Claudius Galenus, better known as Galen, celebrated for centuries as a genius. Galen's writings formed the foundation of Western medical thought for over a millennium. His teachings were copied, studied, and praised by everyone from medieval monks to Renaissance physicians. But buried in the restricted sections of the Vatican Archives lies a different side of Galen, one carefully excised from the history books. The document that first shatters his pristine image is an ancient Greek manuscript titled Experimenta Anatomical Experiments. It describes, with clinical detachment and excruciating detail, the systematic use of live human beings for medical experimentation. These were not autopsies. They were live dissections. The victims, slaves, prisoners of war, and sometimes even innocent civilians, were restrained on cold stone slabs, often fully conscious and aware of what was about to unfold. The objective: to observe the body's inner workings in real time. Galen and his team sought to understand how the heart beat, how the lungs expanded, and how nerves carried pain, and they believed the only way to uncover these secrets was to cut open living bodies and record what happened. One passage recounts a particularly horrific scene. A young male slave, selected for his physical health, was anesthetized just enough to remain alive but conscious. His chest was opened slowly, while Galen observed the movement of his heart and lungs. No painkillers, no mercy, only curiosity, cloaked in the language of science. Even more disturbing is what followed. Galen wasn't acting alone. Vatican records refer to a clandestine Roman institution, Anatomica, specialist secretive network of research facilities funded by the empire and protected by the military. Its sole purpose was to conduct anatomical experiments that would be deemed morally intolerable even by ancient standards. Documents from this institute are chilling. Another Latin manuscript titled Liber Mortis et Doloris, the Book of Death and Pain, lists over 300 live anatomical procedures, many conducted under Galen's supervision. Victims were chosen with cruel precision, young, healthy men from conquered provinces, especially those with unique physical traits. Some were dissected to study how long certain organs could function after removal. Others were tested to determine how much pain a body could endure before death. These weren't just acts of science, they were trials in torture. In the margins of one experiment, a young Roman physician wrote, "At first I felt sickened by what I saw, but over time my heart grew silent. The screams became normal, the suffering became data. I understood this was for glory, for knowledge, for Rome." It is this emotional detachment, this moral decay, that perhaps haunts the Vatican most. The subjects of these experiments were not seen as human beings. They were described as specimens, cases, and units, flesh turned into numbers, pain transformed into charts. And while Galen publicly wore the robes of enlightenment, privately he orchestrated acts of unfathomable cruelty. So why has this chapter of history remained hidden? Because these revelations don't just stain Galen, they stain the entire narrative of Western intellectual superiority. They challenge the myth that knowledge always comes from noble curiosity. They reveal that the pursuit of truth, when untethered from ethics, can become monstrous. The Vatican's refusal to reveal these documents isn't just about protecting the Church. It's about shielding humanity from a reflection of itself, a mirror we're not ready to look into. Because once we see what has been done in the name of knowledge, civilization, and even salvation, we may never look at history the same way again. And yet, that truth is still there, in parchment, in ink, in blood, stored in silence beneath the marble sanctuaries of the Vatican. waiting to Galen and his contemporaries. The men and women dissected, alive cut, open while still conscious, and enduring unbearable agony, were not seen as victims, but as necessary sacrifices in the relentless pursuit of scientific knowledge. So why has the Vatican gone to such great lengths to hide these documents for centuries? The answer lies deep within the philosophical heart of the Catholic Church. For generations, the Vatican has sought to portray the ancient world, especially Rome, as a civilization capable of harmonizing faith, morality, and human dignity, revealing that revered figures like Galen, the so-called father of Western medicine, once committed such horrifying acts, would shatter the ethical narrative the Church has so carefully constructed over to millennia. But it goes further. The Vatican understood that exposing the Roman Empire's endorsement of such inhumane practices would stain the image of classical antiquity itself, the very cultural and political foundation upon which much of Western civilization, and by extension the Church, was built. If the Church claimed to be the spiritual heir to Rome, then unveiling this darker inheritance would be nothing short of self-destruction. A letter dated to the 4th century, written by Bishop Marcus Aurelius Clemens and addressed directly to the Vatican, speaks with grave clarity the horrific experiments of Roman physicians, regardless of their scientific justification, are abominations before the eyes of God. These records must be destroyed or buried forever, not only to protect the Church's reputation, but also to preserve the conscience of humanity. In the end, the Church chose secrecy over destruction. The records were not burned, but sealed, hidden, restricted to a tiny circle of hand-picked scholars, each bound by sacred oaths of silence. Even they were permitted to see only heavily redacted fragments of the original documents. And so, Galen's story faded from public memory, not erased, but silenced. But his legacy is more than historical. It is a moral indictment, haunting reminder that even the most brilliant minds in human history can become blind to compassion when seduced by power and the promise of progress. Now, pause for a moment and ask yourself, have we truly learned the lessons of our past? Or are we still repeating the same horrors in subtler ways, hidden behind laboratory doors, buried in legal frameworks, or concealed beneath institutional silence? Because Galen's vivisections were just the beginning. As we venture deeper into the shadowed corridors of the Vatican archives, we uncover something even darker, a record of atrocities committed not in the name of science, but in the name of empire, systematic acts of cultural extermination hidden from official Roman history. In a forgotten stone chamber, lit only by a single oil lamp, lies a sealed military file labeled Expugnatio Barbarum, the annihilation of the barbarians. Inside are secret field reports, written by Roman generals and commanders, chronicling mass extermination campaigns across the regions of Galmadon de France and Dacia, now part of Romania. These weren't battlefield reports meant for Senate debate. They were confidential communiques sent directly to the Roman elite and quietly hidden, because they revealed truths too horrifying for the public to ever know. Among them is a first-hand account written by Julius Caesar himself, documenting his brutal siege of the Gallic city of Alesia. We have utterly destroyed the city. Those who survived now weep upon the ashes. Their temples lie in ruin, their gods torn from their altars, their memory consumed by fire. We are not merely conquering their land, we are erasing their past. Rome must become their only future. This was not chaotic slaughter. It was precise, ideological warfare, a calculated effort to eliminate not just lives, but culture, history, an identity in a classified letter sent to the Roman Senate in 52 BC. Caesar wrote bluntly, "Only when every trace of Gaul's past has been wiped clean can we claim true victory. To achieve this, every method, no matter how merciless, is justified, and Gaul was only the beginning." In the 2nd century AD, under the command of Emperor Trajan, a similar nightmare unfolded in Dacia. The Vatican archives still hold encoded military reports detailing how the proud Dacian people, known for their wealth and fierce resistance, were systematically destroyed. Temples razed, shrines desecrated, religious artifacts ground into dust. A chilling dispatch from the commander of the 13th Legion, preserved in faded ink, reads, "We have eliminated every major temple in their capital, Samizagbatis. All inscription stone, bronze, wood were obliterated. Every sacred text was burned beyond recovery. From this day forward, the memory of Dacia will be what Rome allows it to be, nothing more." Even more disturbing are the military maps recovered from the Vatican's war archive, created by Roman strategists before the invasions. These maps highlight not forts or rivers, but temples, sacred sites, and cultural landmarks. These weren't afterthoughts, they were primary targets. This was not conventional warfare. This was cultural genocide. A deliberate erasure of spiritual identity, a strategic obliteration of memory. And once again, the Vatican had its reasons for keeping this silent. As the institutional heir to Rome, the early church was deeply invested in maintaining the illusion of moral continuity, that the empire-that crucified martyrs had eventually been redeemed by the cross. To reveal that Rome had engaged in systemic, empire-wide cultural annihilation would collapse the very mythology of transformation upon which the church's authority was built. And so these documents were hidden, not destroyed, not forgotten, just kept in the dark like so many painful truths. But now, those shadows are being lifted. From Galen's surgical tables to Caesar's scorched hearth decrees, the forgotten horrors of Rome remind us that power, be it scientific, military, or spiritual, must never be allowed to grow without moral restraint. And if we do not confront these truths now, how many more will be buried in silence, beneath vaults of marble and centuries of fear? Agrena wrote secretly to a trusted maid, "We must do this with absolute precision. Claudius's death must leave no suspicion behind. My son must ascend without anyone suspecting foul play." Once Claudius died, every trace of the poisoning was swiftly erased. Witnesses were silenced or bribed, and Nero smoothly stepped into power. The Vatican understands perfectly that releasing these letters would completely alter history's perception of this turbulent era. The final shocking case detailed in these secret files concerns the assassination of Emperor Caracalla, who ruled from 198 to 217 AD. History books traditionally record that he was spontaneously murdered by a bodyguard while relieving himself on a military campaign. But the Vatican's hidden files reveal that this assassination was far from spontaneous. It was the outcome of a carefully orchestrated conspiracy involving Rome's most powerful court figures. One confidential entry describes how top officials and certain royal family members secretly agreed to assassinate Caracalla, deeply alarmed by his increasing paranoia and cruelty, fearing he would plunge the empire into disaster. Among the most startling documents is a secret correspondence between senior Roman generals, explicitly outlining the assassination plan and naming those who masterminded it. Caracalla grows more dangerous by the day, executing even his closest allies at the slightest hint of suspicion. We can no longer allow this madman to rule. The assassination must be swift and precise, leaving no trail leading back to us. According to these hidden records, the actual assassin, an officer named Julius Marcellus, was merely a small pawn in a much larger scheme. Marcellus acted strictly under orders, and immediately after successfully killing Caracalla, he was swiftly eliminated to prevent any possibility of exposing those behind the conspiracy. The secret documents stored deep within the Vatican archives don't merely reveal the shocking truths behind these imperial assassinations. They also provide clear evidence that the Roman Empire routinely and systematically used poison as a political tool. A detailed file titled De Venetiis Caesarum on the poisonings of emperors specifically lists dozens of different toxins employed by Roman court officials, including arsenic and numerous other sophisticated chemical compounds expertly crafted by the imperial physicians. What's particularly chilling in these files are meticulous notes describing how poisons were prepared and administered in ways that made victims' deaths appear completely natural or caused by sudden illness. Court doctors and chemists are portrayed almost as skilled artists, masters not only at concocting deadly substances, but also at disguising causes of death so flawlessly that suspicion never arose. So, why has the Vatican kept these disturbing facts hidden for nearly 2,000 years? A major part of the answer lies in their fear that exposing these ruthless political conspiracies would severely damage Rome's image as a symbol of civilization, order, and morality. Agrippina wrote secretly to a trusted maid, "We must do this with absolute precision. Claudius's death must leave no suspicion behind. My son must descend without anyone suspecting foul play." And so, when Claudius died, every trace of the poisoning was swiftly erased. Witnesses were silenced or bribed. Nero, young and unburdened by guilt, stepped smoothly into power. But hidden within the Vatican's forbidden archives lies the quiet knowledge that these letters, these whispers of conspiracy would, if released, utterly shatter history's accepted portrait of that turbulent era. But that is not the end of the Vatican's secrets. The final and perhaps most shocking case preserved in these guarded files concerns the assassination of Emperor Caracalla, who ruled from 198 to 217 AD. Standard history textbooks tell a simple story: that he was spontaneously murdered by a bodyguard while relieving himself on the campaign. But the Vatican's hidden records tell a very different tale, one of deliberate orchestration, deep court betrayal, and the empire's quiet panic in the face of one man's unraveling mind. One confidential entry reveals that Rome's most powerful officials, senators, generals, and even members of the royal family met in secret. Alarmed by Caracalla's growing paranoia and cruelty, they feared he would plunge the empire into irreversible chaos. In a letter buried in the archives, one Roman general wrote, "Caracalla grows more dangerous by the day. He executes his closest allies on mere suspicion. If we do not act, we will all perish under his madness. The assassination must be swift and precise and leave no trail." The records name the actual assassin officer named Julius Marcellus. But what the public never knew was that Marcellus was merely a pawn in a far greater game. He acted under direct orders, and the moment he completed his deadly task, he himself was eliminated, silenced forever to protect those who orchestrated the plot. This pattern of ruthless political murder is not isolated. Deep in the archives, in a chilling file titled De Venetiis Caesarum, on the poisons of the Caesars, lies proof that the Roman Empire regularly used poison as a strategic weapon of governance. These files list dozens of toxins used to quietly remove inconvenient emperors and rivals. arsenic, belladonna, powdered emeralds, and other sophisticated compounds carefully engineered by imperial physicians. They describe, in painstaking detail, how poisons were administered in wine, in perfumes, and in food, and how they were expertly designed to mimic death by natural causes. One entry describes the work of court chemists as an art form, crafting death as invisibly as a painter blends color into canvas. Physicians were not mere healers, but masters of illusion. And emperors did not just fear daggers, they feared the wine at their own banquets. So why, then, has the Vatican concealed these files for nearly 2,000 years? The answer lies not only in shame or secrecy, but in survival. Revealing these truths would unravel the myth that Rome, and by extension, the church that inherited its mantle, was built on virtue, order, and divine justice. In a confidential 6th century letter stored within the Vatican's most restricted vaults, a high-ranking bishop wrote, "If these documents ever become widely known, we will lose our claim as heirs to a civilization founded upon justice and morality, an image the Vatican has always sought to protect." But even more fundamentally, the Vatican worried that revealing these documents would shake public confidence in the legitimacy of political authority inherited from ancient Rome itself. In a confidential letter preserved carefully in the Vatican archives from the late 6th century, a higher-ranking bishop expressed this concern explicitly. "If these documents ever become widely known, we will lose our claim as heirs to a civilization founded upon justice and morality." Rome was not just a great empire, it was a symbol of moral authority. We cannot allow history to remember Rome as a place filled with ruthless conspiracies and assassinations. This explains why the Vatican has kept these files tightly sealed, permitting only a select few historians and scholars limited access under strict supervision. Those allowed to examine the documents must swear absolute secrecy regarding what they see. Even more intriguingly, the Vatican archives contain correspondence and documents detailing past Vatican efforts to prevent the release of these secret assassination records. One particularly striking letter from the 17th century written by a cardinal directly orders, "Under no circumstances are documents relating to the assassinations of Caesars permitted to leave the Holy See. Any person attempting to disclose these secrets will be permanently exiled and punished by any means necessary." This clearly demonstrates that even in more recent centuries, the Vatican remained fiercely committed to controlling knowledge about Rome's dark past. The Vatican fully understands that history is not merely a record of events that took place, but rather a narrative shaped by what we choose to reveal and what we strive to hide forever. From the bloody assassinations inside Roman palaces, we now step into another shadowy realm, one where political power used not only poison and daggers, but also wielded an even more subtle and powerful weapon, religion. Hidden deep within the Vatican archives, carefully guarded behind layers of security, is a special collection titled Epistle Constantine, the Letters of Constantine. This collection contains secret correspondences exchanged between Emperor Constantine, the first Roman emperor to officially legalize Christianity, and the highest-ranking Christian bishops of the early 4th century. These letters reveal a dramatically different story from the one we've been traditionally told. Christianity was not simply embraced by Constantine out of genuine faith. Rather, it was the result of a calculated political deal, a historical bargain, between Rome's powerful emperor and the early Christian church. These letters, some written in Greek, others in Latin, explicitly show how Constantine saw Christianity primarily as a strategic tool to unify his deeply divided empire. In a particularly revealing letter addressed to a senior bishop named Eusebius in the year 313 AE, Constantine bluntly stated, "I have little interest in theological debates, but I see clearly that this new faith has greater potential to unify my people than any legion of soldiers. If you can help me stabilize the empire." Rome was not merely an empire, it was our proof of divine succession. If that image is shattered, so too is our authority. Rome had to remain sacred, untouchable, even if its palaces had run with blood. To this day, only a select few historians are granted supervised access to these documents. They must sign binding oaths of secrecy. Any violation is punishable by immediate excommunication. Even more startling are the Vatican's own records of preventing the release of these files. A 17th century letter from a powerful cardinal gives a chilling order. Under no circumstances are documents relating to the assassinations of Caesars permitted to leave the Holy See. Any individual attempting disclosure shall be excommunicated and silenced by any means necessary. This is not merely protection of the past, it is control of the narrative. The Vatican understands one of history's most powerful truths, that the past is not just what happened, is what we choose to remember. And from the marble halls of imperial Rome, we now step into an even deeper realm of shadow, a place where power moved not only through poison and steel, but through faith. Hidden deeper still within the Vatican archives is a collection labeled Epistulae Constantini, the letters of Constantine. These fragile scrolls record secret correspondence between Emperor Constantine and the early Christian bishops of the 4th century. They tell a story the world was never meant to hear. The traditional tale is well known. Constantine, moved by divine vision, converted to Christianity and made it the empire's official faith. But these letters paint a far more calculating picture. In one stunning letter from 313 AD, addressed to a senior bishop named Eusebius, Constantine wrote, "I have little interest in theological debate, but I see clearly this new faith holds more power to unite the people than a legion of soldiers. If you can help me stabilize the empire, I will. Give your church dominion over its soul." It was not a conversion, it was a deal. Christianity, once persecuted, became not just tolerated, but instrumental to imperial control. In return, bishops received royal protection, wealth, and political influence. Over time, they would evolve into the very institution that would one day seal away these letters, fearful that the truth might expose how power was traded in shadows, not bestowed from the heavens. From poisoned goblets to holy altars, from whispered assassinations to whispered prayers, the Vatican archives are not simply a library of forgotten documents. They are the hidden mirror of civilization itself, a mirror we were never meant to look into. I will ensure Christianity takes its rightful place in Rome. This wasn't merely a statement of faith, it was a calculated move. What stands out here isn't just Constantine's pragmatic leadership, but the cold precision with which he viewed Christianity, not as a divine truth, but as a political instrument, more effective for controlling public sentiment than any legion or blade. Hidden deep in the Vatican archives are letters that confirm this unsettling reality. They raise a haunting question. Did Christianity truly rise on the wings of faith? Was it harnessed, sculpted, and weaponized by a powerful emperor to forge unity and obedience? One of the most pivotal events mentioned in these secret letters is the Council of Nicaea in 325 AD, moment often portrayed as a theological gathering to resolve disputes within early Christianity. But these private Vatican records suggest something far more complex and far more deliberate. The Council of Nicaea was, in truth, a meticulously orchestrated political event, engineered by Constantine to unite religious belief under one imperial doctrine and, thereby, cement his absolute authority over the Roman Empire. In a private letter written just before the council, Constantine made his intentions clear. If we are to use Christianity as the empire's new foundation, these bishops must present one system of belief. Any disagreement will weaken Rome. I demand that they reach consensus by whatever means necessary. According to these secret Vatican records, Constantine exerted overwhelming pressure on the bishops. He demanded not a dialogue, but a verdict. Those who refused to conform were expelled, threatened, or marked as enemies of the empire. An internal document from the council, hidden for centuries, stated bluntly, the emperor issued an unmistakable command. Those refusing to sign the new statement of faith will not only be expelled from the council, but regarded as traitors. To Rome itself, we had no choice but to comply. From this moment came the Nicene Creed declaration that became the cornerstone of Orthodox Christianity. But perhaps even more consequential was what happened behind closed doors. According to a collection of secret documents known as the Acta Secreta Nicaea, Constantine and his top religious advisors made a chilling decision to select which sacred texts would become part of the official Bible and to permanently erase those deemed dangerous. One bishop, in a private letter, confessed, "We discarded many writings, not because they were false, but because they posed too great a threat to the empire's stability. If the people were to read them, they would begin asking questions we could not answer." These were not minor exclusions. Among the texts removed were the Gospel of Thomas, the Gospel of Judas, and the Gospel of Mary Magdalene, writings that encouraged personal spiritual discovery rather than submission to centralized religious authority, that made them unacceptable. The Gospel of Thomas taught that the kingdom of God is within. The Gospel of Mary revealed a more human, intimate side of Jesus. The Gospel of Judas challenged the very nature of betrayal and sacrifice. Constantine could not afford such freedom of thought. Instead, he mandated the inclusion of texts that emphasized hierarchy, obedience, and divine authority, elements that would not only serve the Church, but solidify Rome's control. In a letter to Bishop Eusebius, the chief editor of the Bible, Constantine wrote, "I require a clear and unified Bible, one that leaves no room for doubt about authority and obedience. The people must understand their place in the order and never question the power of the Church or of the Emperor." This was not just a religious moment. It was a political revolution disguised as divine revelation. The Vatican has kept these documents hidden for nearly 2,000 years. Why? Because they know that if these letters were ever released, it would shake the foundations of Christianity itself. It would force believers to ask the most painful question of all. Is the Bible we hold sacred truly the Word of God? Or is it the result of imperial strategy, forged during that sweltering summer of 325 AD in Nicaea? A document from the 9th century, marked Confidentialis Ecclesiae, reveals why these secrets remain buried. A senior bishop in Rome wrote, "If the truth of how the Bible was created were ever made public, the faith of every believer would be shaken. We are not merely protecting the Church, we are preserving the entire social order it upholds." Even today, scholars granted access to these archives must sign strict agreements. They are forbidden from revealing what they uncover. Those who break this silence are banished and some face consequences that remain unspoken. Because the truth doesn't just threaten doctrine, it threatens power. The Vatican understands that exposing Constantine's bargain with the early church would not only redefine Christianity's origins, but also unravel centuries of political influence. And it doesn't end with Christianity. The Vatican archives also contained records suggesting that even ancient Roman mythologies, those familiar tales of Jupiter, Mars, and Venus, were similarly curated. Stories once thought sacred or poetic were edited and repurposed to serve political agendas, giving divine legitimacy to imperial campaigns. History, it turns out, isn't just written by the victors, it's designed by them, and sometimes sanctified. Hidden deep within the Vatican's underground libraries lies a vault known only to a select few mythologia, or imperial mythology. This secluded chamber preserves some of the earliest and most unaltered versions of Roman myths that, over the centuries, were systematically rewritten by emperors and their court scholars to serve one purpose above all: the consolidation of power. According to these secret manuscripts, the manipulation began in earnest under Emperor Augustus. He understood something that few rulers before him had fully grasped. Myths are not mere stories. They are the psychological foundation of a civilization. In a confidential letter to his trusted advisor, Marcus Agrippa, Augustus wrote, "We must make the people believe I was chosen by the gods themselves. We will rewrite our myths. Let each story proclaim one truth above all: my power is divine and untouchable." The result was a sweeping transformation. Myths like those of Romulus and Remus, Mars, and even Jupiter were carefully rewritten to glorify Augustus and portray him as the living fulfillment of divine will. In one example, a forgotten earlier version of the Romulus and Remus myth only in the Vatican depicts the twins not as rivals, but as symbolic partners representing the balance of republican governance. But Augustus rejected that balance. In his revision, Romulus alone becomes the central hero, divinely ordained, crowned by the gods not through merit, but through inherited sanctity. In this retelling, Remus disappears, almost entirely an inconvenient symbol of shared power in an empire that would tolerate no such thing. Supporting this transformation are internal Roman documents, many sealed for centuries, found deep in the Vatican archives. One imperial instruction reads with chilling clarity: "The emperor wishes to emphasize that Mars himself assisted Romulus in founding Rome. Passages not aligned with this truth must be removed or revised accordingly." This wasn't isolated. It became a state policy. Subsequent emperors Nero, Domitian, and most dramatically, Commodus continued this deliberate recasting of mythology. The Vatican holds a particularly disturbing cache of documents from the reign of Commodus, who boldly declared himself the living incarnation of Hercules. Letters from court officials detail his orders. "When the people read of Hercules, they must see me. Make every feat, every triumph, every symbol of Hercules. Mine, I am not merely a ruler of Rome, I am a god among them." But here lies the most explosive truth. The Vatican archives not only safeguard these politically revised versions, but also preserve the originals, unedited, untouched, hidden in a vault under the highest classification, known internally as Liber Prohibitus, the Forbidden Bookroom. Why? Because these ancient texts tell a radically different story. The earliest Roman myths, long buried and almost completely unknown to the public, do not glorify absolute power. They celebrate human struggle, moral ambiguity, civic virtue, and the fragility of leadership. They present gods not as but as flawed, conflicted figures, reflections of human nature, rather than objects of divine perfection. One such manuscript, titled Liber Antiquis Romanis, the ancient book of the Romans, written around the 2nd century BC, offers a portrayal of Jupiter not as an all-powerful ruler, but as a tempestuous, conflicted figure. Mars, the god of war, is shown in one passage weeping after a brutal battle, expressing remorse and spiritual fatigue. Must every glory be paid for in blood? He asks in one line, later erased by imperial decree. Another forgotten myth describes Minerva in its oldest form not as a cold symbol of stratigraphy, but as a goddess of moral tension torn between wisdom and obedience, unsure whether to support imperial conquest or the cries of the oppressed. These versions were quietly erased. A handwritten note from the reign of Emperor Decian, preserved in the Vatican's sealed mythological editing orders, states, "The Emperor insists we remove all references to hesitation, grief, or internal conflict among the gods. They must appear strong, perfect, and unwavering, just as His Imperial Majesty must be perceived by the people." Thus, a mythological system was forged, one in which emperors became living reflections of divine perfection. A structure so effective it would inspire not only Roman emperors, but also monarchs and religious leaders for centuries to come. But the original texts remain, and the Vatican guards them with relentless caution. Why? Because if the world were to discover that the foundational myths of Rome, myths used for millennia to justify authority, hierarchy, and imperial conquest, were originally humble, self-reflective, and even subversive, it would shake the philosophical core of Western civilization. It would raise a far more dangerous question. If the gods themselves once doubted, once struggled, once wept, who among us has the right to rule unquestioned? That is a question the emperors buried, and one the Vatican has quietly protected for nearly 2,000 years. An internal Vatican document dating back to the 8th century, authored by a senior church official, addresses a haunting question directly. "We cannot allow the original myths to become widely known," it states. "They carry a dangerous message that power itself is inherently complex, imperfect, and fallible. Should the public come to understand this, they will begin to ask questions we are neither willing nor able to answer. The imperative is clear. The gods must remain perfect and elevated, for they serve not only as symbols of divinity but also as anchors for the social order the Church has spent centuries constructing. If that illusion crumbles, so too might the very structure of society." Other confidential records housed in the depths of the Vatican archives recount how a small number of trusted scholars, granted tightly controlled, temporary access, been left in stunned silence upon discovering the scope and subtlety of mythological manipulation carried out by ancient Roman authorities. What they uncovered was not mere rewriting, it was wholesale transformation. Roman emperors didn't just revise stories, they re-engineered the very moral frameworks behind them. Myths that once challenged power and that questioned leadership, justice, and the fallibility of rulers were twisted into tools of propaganda. Where the earliest tales encouraged reflection, responsibility, and even rebellion, the revised versions praised submission, divine hierarchy, and absolute control. These original myths, preserved under the strictest Vatican protection, posed dangerous questions, not only about ancient gods and rulers, but about the very idea of authority. Their true message warns us: real power should be earned, not worshipped, and leaders must answer not only to their subjects, but also to their own conscience. If such messages were released today, ordinary citizens began to understand that mythology itself was engineered to keep them obedient. The legitimacy of both church and state could collapse. That is why these texts remain locked away, not merely for historical preservation, but for the continued protection of social order. Even when scholars are allowed access, they do so under relentless surveillance and solemn vows of eternal silence. No photographs, no copies, no names. And yet, the manipulation of myth was only the beginning. Beneath the surface of imperial history lies something even more secretive. A hidden world, long buried beneath centuries of official narrative, the realm of secret societies. Among the most tightly restricted sections of the Vatican Archives is a cryptic and highly classified collection known as the the Saturnalia Files. These chilling documents suggest that the famed Roman festival of Saturnalia, long considered a chaotic but harmless celebration of role reversals, feasting, and carnival, was, in truth, a mask for something far more serious: the operations of an elite, clandestine council that guided the Roman Empire from behind the scenes. These files describe a hidden assembly of Rome's most powerful individuals, high priests, generals, senators, and aristocrats. Cloaked in anonymity, they gathered deep underground during the darkest hours of Saturnalia. Far from the gaze of common citizens, the chambers were sealed, the rituals precise, and the purpose singular: to shape the fate of the empire in absolute secrecy. A confidential Vatican description details these rituals in eerie clarity. At the blackest hour, it reads, they descend into the earth, faces covered, their robes dark as night. By flickering torchlight, they enact rites older than Rome itself, and there, amidst shadow and silence, the destiny of nations is quietly determined. According to these files, the Saturnalia Council didn't merely debate or advise, they ruled. Their authority superseded that of emperors. Their decisions shaped conquests, trade, succession, even who would live and who would vanish from the map entirely. The council used strange symbolic maps filled with cryptic symbols, curling lines, and undeciphered glyphs to dictate the fate of provinces, peoples, and entire civilizations. One member wrote chillingly, "We place our hands upon the sacred chart, and the map responds. From these patterns, we declare which land shall rise and which must fall. The future of the empire rests in the hands of those who dwell in shadow." Even more disturbing, these symbolic maps have been preserved. The Vatican not only keeps the records of these councils, it still protects the very artifacts they used. No modern scholar has fully decoded them. Their language defies every known dialect. Some whisper that they carry not information, but invocation. Most shocking of all are the figures involved. Leaked correspondence and preserved letters confirm that emperors such as Augustus, Nero, and Marcus Aurelius were either direct members or deeply connected to the Saturnalia Council. In one private letter, Emperor Nero writes to a figure known only as Pater Saturnalius, the father of Saturnalia. "I have done exactly as the council instructed," Nero writes. "Rome burns, but from the ashes our new power shall rise. I trust the council finds satisfaction in my actions." This Pater Saturnalis remains the most enigmatic figure in the entire archive. Described only in fragments, he was not merely a leader, he was the spiritual anchor of the council, known also as the keeper of Rome's fate. No official record identifies him. His name, origins, and role are known only through whispers preserved in secret. Yet what most terrified church officials about the Saturnalia Council was not merely their political influence, it was their rituals, conducted in hidden catacombs. These ceremonies blurred the line between religion, governance, and arcane power. The council operated outside of public morality, outside of imperial law, and even outside of the gods they claimed to serve. A Vatican memo from the 13th century warns, these rites must never be known to the faithful. They risk corrupting not only belief, but the very soul of civilization. To this day, access to the Acta Satanali is restricted to fewer than 5 individuals within the Church. Researchers who've studied the files are forbidden from speaking publicly. Several have reportedly vanished. Others left behind journals filled with disjointed ramblings, pages torn, ink smeared, words scratched out with fear. And yet, the silence speaks volumes. The truth buried beneath centuries of myth, empire, and religion is darker and far more deliberate than we were ever meant to know. The gods, it turns out, were not born perfect. They were made that way, in shadows. By human hands, secret Vatican files describe disturbing ceremonies performed in absolute darkness, rituals involving masked participants, cryptic symbols etched into the stone, and symbolic animal sacrifices conducted beneath the city to determine Rome's fate. One classified document, penned by a Roman priest in the 5th century, offers an unsettling glimpse into this forgotten world. It details the rites of Satilian, annual occult gathering where prophecies were chanted in dead languages. Symbolic patterns were drawn onto ancient scroll maps, and empire-defining decisions were made in silence, by candlelight, under the earth. No emperor dared defy the decisions of this hidden council. Every ruler knew, consciously or not, that real power did not reside on the imperial throne, but in these shadowy catacombs, in the hands of those whose names were never spoken aloud. This revelation forces us to confront a disturbing possibility. Have we ever truly known the full history of ancient Rome, or have we only seen the thin surface, the carefully curated version those in power allowed us to see? And what more, still, buried in the vaults of the Vatican, remains locked away so dangerous, so destabilizing, that even the most trusted scholars have been barred from seeing it. Secret Vatican records suggest that the Saturnalia, societies, a mysterious order behind these rituals, did not vanish with the fall of Rome. On the contrary, documents from the 6th and 7th centuries imply that the society continued its operations, quietly adapting to the fading empire, whispering into the ears of emerging kings and bishops, even as Rome ceased to be the world's political heart. The Church has taken extraordinary steps to keep this knowledge from surfacing. A classified internal letter, dated to the 14th century, makes the reasoning clear. We must never allow the world to know that Rome's authority and, by extension, our own, was once shaped and manipulated by veiled hands beneath the earth. If such truths become public, the moral authority of the Church would suffer irreparable harm. This is why the Vatican archives are not simply hidden, they are fiercely protected. Researchers granted rare access undergo months of intense scrutiny and are required to swear oaths of silence. Many never speak publicly again. But perhaps the most haunting discovery is not the existence of secret societies or forbidden rituals, but of ancient maps. Secured within the Vatican's deepest and most impenetrable chambers are a series of documents, known only to a few as tabula obscura maps, unlike any ever seen in public. These are not records of known Roman roads or provincial boundaries. They chart a secret Rome, a second Rome. One of the earliest surviving descriptions comes from a stunned 4th century cleric named Lucius Rufinus Waurit, When I first beheld these maps, I could not believe my eyes. They depicted a Rome unseen by the world, above connected by tunnels and roads, unknown to any living cartographer, leading to sacred sites utterly erased from official memory. These maps didn't just chart hidden routes, they pointed to treasures, an inventory discovered alongside them, titled in Venarium Thesaurus lists hundreds of concealed vaults, each tied to an underground location. Among the most extraordinary entries is one that refers to a vast subterranean complex named Roma Secunda, the Second Rome. This hidden city is not mentioned in any surviving Roman histories. It appears only on the secret maps. According to the archives, Roma Secunda was engineered beneath the city as a sanctuary for the empire's most sacred treasures, forbidden manuscripts, and relics capable of unraveling Rome's and, perhaps, Christianity's official history. These maps, preserved not as relics, but as living records, offer not merely directions, but a philosophy of concealment. They lead to an alternate Rome, one born in darkness, sustained in secrecy, and erased from public memory. 15th century. Vatican scholar Alejandro Diana recorded his awe and horror in a sealed journal. When I traced the ancient routes on the maps, I did not find familiar names. I found silence. I found places the world had forgotten, or perhaps was made to forget. Some of these roads run downward, not outward, into the depths of the earth, toward temples, sealed vaults, and chambers marked with symbols whose meaning has been lost for centuries, or purposely erased. One such document Tabula Secunda Rami, or map of the Second Rome, bears a chilling inscription. This secret city lies directly beneath the most trafficked streets of Rome, built in darkness. It is a labyrinth of corridors and chambers, where the empire's most sacred and most dangerous objects are kept. Only the highest among the ruling elite ever dared enter. But the most terrifying revelation is this: Roma Secunda was not merely a vault, it was a nerve center. According to these classified documents, it was here, not in the palaces above, where the real decisions were made, where emperors were anointed, where truths were buried, and where the true fate of empires was whispered not in marble halls, but in torchlit chambers deep below. What remains locked beneath the Vatican is not just history, is the key to a history rewritten, reshaped, and reburied by centuries of silence. A center whose existence was known only to a select few, its authority so immense that even the most powerful emperors had to bow to it in silence. A confidential imperial record from the era of Constantine contains a chilling admission: even the emperor must understand that Rome's true power does not sit in palaces or on thrones. It dwells deep beneath the city, where the keepers of secrets and guardians of treasures decide the fate of all. So what exactly are the Vatican archives hiding about these maps? And why have they remained hidden for so long? A secret letter, dated to the 17th century, written by a higher-ranking Vatican cleric, offers a disturbing explanation. If these maps were ever to fall into the wrong hands, the world as we know it would never be the same. Each route contains knowledge humanity is not ready to face. We conceal these maps, not to protect the Church alone, but to shield mankind from truths it cannot yet comprehend, let alone control. The implications are staggering. The Vatican knows that revealing the existence of a hidden Rome would raise profoundly uncomfortable questions. Could history itself be a fragile illusion, a surface story crafted to hide deeper, darker realities? An 18th century classified document, written by a cardinal with access to the inner sanctum of the archives, states plainly, the Second Rome is not merely a vault of physical relics. It holds truths about the nature of power, the real origins of mankind, and secrets that could collapse the order of the world. This is why the Vatican not only safeguards these maps and manuscripts, but also surrounds them with an iron wall of secrecy, surveillance, and regulation. Even the few scholars allowed access must endure intense scrutiny, multiple security clearances, limited time inside, and constant monitoring under Vatican supervision. Our journey into the dark corridors of history, into the buried veins of the Roman Empire, has brought us to an unsettling but inescapable conclusion. The history we've been taught is not the full truth. What we read in textbooks or hear from official sources isn't always a factual account. It is a narrative selected, shaped, and edited by those in power to preserve their influence and suppress dangerous truths. From the infamous fire under Nero to long-lost maps, secret societies, and forbidden manuscripts, we begin to understand real power is not only rooted in transparency, it thrives in shadows. It is built on carefully curated ignorance. Never before has the link between religion, empire, and historical revisionism been more clear. The Roman Empire didn't just conquer with legions, it conquered minds through myths, rewritten texts, silenced prophets, and buried evidence. Because true power isn't just the ability to rule, it's the ability to shape memory, to rewrite belief, to decide what humanity is allowed to know. The Vatican Secret Archives are more than a library. They are the central vault of humanities. Filtered memory where truth is considered too volatile for public knowledge. The Church's guardians don't just preserve these records. They protect, censor, and, at times, bury them not only to protect their own survival, but to maintain a global status quo they believe the world is not yet ready to break. But we must now ask, with all our scientific advancements, growing awareness, and evolving ethics, are we truly ready to confront the darkness behind our own civilization? Are we willing to face secrets that may shatter everything we thought we knew? Could it be that what the world needs most right now is precisely what has been locked away? Because perhaps, just perhaps only by confronting the dark can we finally recognize the light. History is not a simple record of events. It is a multi-layered structure, part truth, part myth, part power. And within those layers lie stories of betrayal, suppression, and warnings we've long ignored. But in that complexity lies our greatest strength, the ability to grow, to ask hard questions, and to rise from the ashes of forgotten truths. In the end, this exploration of Rome's buried secrets is not meant to break our faith in history. It is a call to awaken, to look at the past with sharper eyes, to question what we're told, and to never accept easy answers from powerful institutions. Because only by doing so can we become the kind of civilization strong enough to face its own reflection. And as the echoes of this truth fade into silence, one final question remains. Are we truly ready, Tokno? And so, we must ask ourselves, we wish to truly understand our world, our past, and even our own human nature. Are we ready to face the truth? Because the truth isn't always beautiful. It's often buried in shadows, wrapped in fear, and deliberately forgotten. But only by walking into that darkness can we begin to see clearly. Take a deep breath, now follow me, into the hidden corridors of the Vatican Archives, where history is not what it seems, and where secrets long buried whisper a version of the past few dare to believe. It was a sweltering summer night in July, 64 AD. The city of Rome lay quiet, the heavy air humming with the restlessness of its people. But within hours, that silence would be shattered by screams, by the sound of timber collapsing into flame, and by a night sky choked with black smoke. The great fire of Rome had begun an inferno that would rage for over 6 days, consuming nearly everything in its path. The official story has always described it as a tragic accident, parked by chance in the densely packed slums near the Circus Maximus, where old wooden structures stood shoulder to shoulder. Ancient historians like Tacitus and Suetonius recounted how flames leapt across homes, temples, markets, and mansions alike. Hundreds of thousands were left homeless. The imperial city had become a smoking ruin. History also tells us that Emperor Nero returned swiftly from his villa outside Rome, opened his gardens to refugees, and coordinated relief. But hidden deep within the Vatican's forbidden archives, sealed under layers of ecclesiastical secrecy, for nearly 2 millennia, a collection of ancient writings that paint a far darker picture. These documents, cryptically labeled Acta Neon, a play on Nero's name, contain confidential correspondence between Roman officials, preserved through centuries in silence. Their contents are nothing short of explosive. Far from being surprised by the fire, these records suggest Nero had anticipated it. Even worse, he had planned it. Letters between high-ranking administrators speak of a bold vision to remake Rome into something grander, more glorious, a city that would reflect the emperor's legacy for eternity. The phrase "rebuilding Rome" appears repeatedly, not as a response to disaster. It appears before the fire ever began. The implication is chilling. To build a new Rome, the old one had to be erased. And such erasure would require a catastrophe, one that could justify sweeping reconstruction. The letters describe how Nero covertly ordered teams of his most loyal guards, disguised as citizens, to ignite the city. These were not random outbreaks. The fires were strategically placed, often fueled with oil-soaked torches hidden beneath cloaks. Witness accounts suggest that even when citizens tried to stop the fires, mysterious figures blocked their way. The blazes spread too quickly, too precisely. It was, in essence, a military operation disguised as a calamity. One document even claims Nero watched from a safe distance as the flames engulfed his capital, not in horror, but with a strange serenity. Some accounts liken it to a theatrical performance, with the emperor as both director and audience. But it didn't end with fire. According to another set of scrolls hidden in the archive, days after the destruction, Nero called a private meeting with his inner circle. The goal: to find a scapegoat. The group chosen would be small, politically weak, and already viewed with suspicion. The Christians. At the time, Christians were a fringe, secretive, misunderstood, and scattered throughout Rome. That made them the perfect target. Documents preserved in the Vatican vaults describe, in haunting detail, a systematic campaign to portray Christians as arsonists and traitors. The persecution that followed was brutal beyond words. Thousands were arrested, without trial. Some were sewn into animal skins and torn apart by wild beasts. Others were crucified. Still more were covered in pitch and set alight, used as living torches to illuminate Nero's gardens at night. One official report states, "Never before have we witnessed cruelty of such scale." These were not executions, they were offering sacrifices made to preserve an illusion. But perhaps the most disturbing piece is a handwritten document known as Annals. Secret Archives, the secret chronicles of Nero, believed to be a personal journal kept by Nero's private secretary. Hidden for centuries, it describes how just days after the fire, while smoke still hung over the ruins. Nero summoned Rome's finest architects to begin immediate planning for a new city. He wanted to call it Neuropolis, a city of order, grandeur, and imperial perfection. The sketches preserved within these documents are stunning. Long, straight roads, grand plazas, colossal monuments. But more disturbing is the match. Every major new avenue, every architectural vision, was mapped directly onto the very districts worst hit by the fire, almost as if the devastation had been orchestrated with surgical precision. In one chilling entry, Nero is recorded as saying to his architects, "To build paradise, we must first pass through hell." Was this the confession of a madman, or the vision of a ruler willing to sacrifice his people to shape history in his image? The Vatican's documents also offer a complex portrait of Nero's mind. Private letters between Nero and his philosopher tutor Seneca, as well as his wife Papaya Sabina, reveal a tormented soul in the aftermath. One surviving letter reads, "Rome burns, but it is my own soul that crackles in the embers. What have I done to my own people? Will time forgive me or damn me for eternity?" Yet this same Nero would later force Seneca to take his own life, suggesting a man not ruled by guilt but by control. A man who crafted his image with the precision of a playwright. In the end, the strategy worked. The people of Rome, grieving and confused, believed the lie. The Christians were blamed, the emperor was exonerated, and a cycle of violence began that would define early Christian history. But irony has its own power. The very persecution that Nero unleashed, the same violence meant to erase Christianity, only made it stronger. Stories of martyrs spread, faith deepened, and in time, Christianity would not only survive, but also become the very religion that would inherit the empire Nero tried to reshape. One final document, dated 68 AD, just after Nero's death, reveals that Rome's new leaders quietly attempted to destroy all remaining evidence of the fire's true origin. Scrolls were burned, letters vanished, witnesses disappeared, but somehow, a few records endured hidden away by those who believed the truth must survive, no matter the cost. And today, they lie here, behind locked doors, beneath marble floors, in the shadows of the Vatican itself, waiting, eventually hidden deep within the fortified vaults of the Vatican. These forbidden scrolls raise a haunting question. Why would the Catholic Church, one of the most enduring and powerful institutions in history, go to such extraordinary lengths to conceal them? The answer is as disturbing as it is revealing. Church leaders may have feared that the contents of these documents would unravel the very foundation of the moral authority they had spent over 1,000 years constructing. These brittle, dust-covered pages continue to whisper secrets beneath Vatican City, and what we've uncovered so far is only the beginning. As the fires of ancient Rome finally dimmed, leaving the empire in ashes and despair, not all was lost to ruin. Behind the grandeur of imperial palaces and under the shadow of collapsing temples, hidden rituals quietly endured, rituals tied to forces far more ancient and unsettling. Among the most chilling secrets sealed within the Vatican archives are the long-buried rites of Mithraism, a clandestine cult that once held Rome's elite in its grasp. Mithraism, once widespread among Roman soldiers and aristocrats, is shrouded in mystery even today. Nearly every trace of its teachings, temples, and symbols was deliberately erased. But the Vatican, for centuries the guardian of countless suppressed truths, quietly preserved what little survived. And those preserved documents reveal something far more sinister than scholars ever imagined. contrary to the belief that myth was a mere spiritual philosophy embraced by soldiers far from home. These rituals, according to the documents, were terrifying. In the candlelit silence of underground chambers, followers carried out bloody ceremonies involving animal and, on rare occasions, human sacrifice. These weren't myths or symbolic dramatizations, they were acts of ritual violence practiced by Rome's most powerful men. Nero himself, along with several emperors after him, is said to have taken part. To understand the gravity of this, one must look at Mithra, the Persian origin deity at the center of this cult. Worshipped as a solar god, a divine warrior representing immortality and conquest, Mithra appealed deeply to Rome's military class. The promise of divine protection and invincibility in war made his cult spread rapidly. Initiates believed they were transformed, empowered, and made nearly immortal through their allegiance and blood oaths. The Vatican Archives describe in chilling detail how Mithra's temples called Mithraea were built underground. These spaces, often hidden beneath Roman streets or remote garrisons, were dark, enclosed sanctuaries of secrecy. In their depths, murals and statues depicted Mithra slaying a sacred Bulla scene believed to represent victory over death and spiritual rebirth. But leaked texts suggest the cult went beyond representation. The blood sacrifice was not just symbolic, it was horrifyingly real. One such manuscript, a 2nd century Latin text titled Mysterium Sanguinis Mithrae, The Mystery of Mithras' Blood, describes in explicit detail how initiates were blindfolded, led into subterranean sanctuaries, and forced to drink blood from silver chalices. Animals were slaughtered before them. In rarer, more secretive ceremonies, humans, often prisoners of war or slaves, were ritually sacrificed to appease the god and anoint the warriors with divine strength. A separate document, authored by a Roman official in the 3rd century and preserved in a sealed Vatican file, recounts a human sacrifice performed in a hidden Mithraeum just outside Rome. A young prisoner, bound tightly to a stone altar, was killed with a curved blade by a high priest as followers knelt and prayed fervently. It wasn't just religion, it was control. Mithraism created men who were not only fearless in battle but also unquestioningly obedient, believing they served a divine order. This may explain why the Catholic Church later became so determined to suppress every trace of the cult. It wasn't only the blood rituals that troubled early Christian leaders. It was the raw, untamed power. Mithraism represented power that united military loyalty, religious ecstasy, and political manipulation. It was a worldview the Church could not coexist with. When Christianity became the official religion of the Roman Empire under Constantine in the 4th century, Mithraism was targeted for destruction. Temples were demolished or sealed off. Initiates were forced to convert or be executed. Sacred documents were seized and, instead of being destroyed, many were hidden, secured, deep within Vatican vaults where their content could be controlled. Perhaps studied, but never revealed. A letter dated to the 5th century, written by a senior church official and kept hidden in the Vatican, reveals just how seriously the Church viewed this cult. It states, "The rites of Mithra must remain forever, buried not only to guard the faithful from false gods, but to conceal the terrifying truth that even the most refined men once worshipped through suffering and blood." Further texts, like the Liber Mithratha, Book of Mithra, offer even more disturbing insights. Written in ancient Greek, this document outlines 7 harrowing stages of initiation. At the final stage, known as Potter, the initiate was required to participate in actual blood rites. In some cases, this meant carrying out a sacrifice himself, proof of loyalty to the god and the elite brotherhood he was about to join. Artwork retrieved from collapsed Mithria, now hidden within Vatican archives, shows horrific scenes, men drinking from bowls of blood, dismembered animals, and even depictions of human victims on altars. These images were not abstract. They were brutally specific, carved into stone with an unflinching realism that defies any symbolic reading. This is precisely why the Vatican has refused to make them public. The psychological weight of these images is unbearable even to modern historians. Some of the few researchers granted limited access have spoken of the emotional toll. One noted, "The brutality described in these rites and the level of political and religious power involved would shatter the Church's moral credibility if ever fully disclosed." But a question remains. Why did Mithraism, once so widespread and influential, vanish so completely from the historical record? Was it mere persecution, or was something else at play? Classified Vatican files hint at a darker answer. As emperors after Nero began to see the cult as a potential threat, not just to their rivals, but to their own rule, they moved to destroy it from within. Mithraism's link to military elites made it dangerously independent. Its secrecy bred conspiracies. By the late 4th century, some emperors saw it as a weapon that could easily be turned against them. Theodosius I, in particular, is documented as waging a merciless campaign to erase Mithraism. According to Vatican-held documents, he deployed military units to hunt down and destroy Mithria across the empire. Priests were executed, texts burned, and remaining materials shipped to Rome under strict secrecy. The goal wasn't conversion. It was total erasure. And yet, despite every effort to bury the past, traces remain locked away beneath the marble halls of Vatican City. These fragments tell us that the shadows of Rome never truly disappeared. They were simply entombed. We are only beginning to unearth them, and so Mithraism gradually dissolved into the mists of forgotten memory, becoming less a religion than a ghost. A phantom faith whispered through fragments of legend and scraps of suppressed text, hidden for centuries in the forbidden depths of the Vatican archives. The blood rites and secret rituals of Mithraism, chilling as they were, represent only a sliver of what the Vatican has quietly concealed from humanity. As we journey further into this shadowed labyrinth, we come face to face with one of the most defining and most misunderstood events in human history, the execution of Jesus Christ. But this time, it isn't told through the familiar words of the Bible. Instead, it emerges through documents long hidden from public view. Ancient records the Vatican has sealed for nearly 2 millennia. In a small, highly secured chamber beneath Vatican City lies a set of bound scrolls known as Acta Pilati, the Pilate Files. These are not recent discoveries. They have existed since antiquity, authored by scribes under the direct authority of Pontius Pilate, the Roman governor of Judea. During the early 1st century, Pilate's name is etched into Christian memory as a reluctant official, hesitant, almost indifferent, famously washing his hands of responsibility. But these secret files tell a very different story. The Acta Pilati reveals a calculating, politically astute governor deeply aware of the unrest in Judea and determined to preserve imperial order at any cost. Written in a mix of Latin and Greek, one particular dispatch stands out. An official report addressed directly to Emperor Tiberius shortly after the crucifixion. In it, Pilate does not portray Jesus as an innocent preacher caught in a religious dispute. Instead, he paints him as a destabilizing political force, a man whose influence was growing too fast to ignore. Pilate had been monitoring Jesus for months through a network of spies and informants. He was especially disturbed by teachings referencing a kingdom not of this world, and the title, King of the Jews, a phrase that, to Roman ears, suggested treason. Rome could tolerate many gods and many faiths, but it could not tolerate a rival to Caesar. According to the files, Pilate did not see the execution as an unfortunate concession to local pressure. He viewed it as a strategic necessity. Jesus of Nazareth, he wrote, is not merely a prophet. He is the nucleus of a movement that may soon ignite rebellion. For a province as volatile as Judea, any sign of revolt risked disaster. And for Pilate, failure to contain it would mean political ruin. The pressure came from all sides. Local religious leaders urged action. Roman commanders in Syria demanded stability. Pilate's report makes it clear executing Jesus was not about appeasing a mob. It was about sending a message that no movement, no matter how spiritual, could be allowed to challenge the authority of Rome. Why, then, has the Catholic Church gone to such great lengths to keep these records hidden? The answer lies not only in history, but also in theology. The Acta Pilati threatens to shift the narrative of Christ's death from divine sacrifice to calculated execution. A political event rather than a purely spiritual one. Such a revelation risks unraveling a cornerstone of Christian belief. If Jesus was primarily seen by Rome as a political threat, not as a divine savior, then the meaning of the crucifixion begins to change. It becomes less about salvation and more about silencing a revolutionary idea. Vatican documents show that these files sparked fierce internal debates in the early church. Some leaders argued they should be destroyed. Others believed the truth, no matter how dangerous, must be preserved. Ultimately, a compromise was reached. The documents would be sealed, hidden from the public, and accessible only to a select few under strict supervision. They remain heavily guarded to this day. But the secrets don't end with strategy and reports. Buried within these files is a chilling, detailed account of Pilate's private interrogation of Jesus and encounter. Mentioned only briefly in the Gospels, but expanded in dramatic detail here. According to these confidential texts, their meeting was not short or procedural. It was long, personal, and intellectually intense. Pilate, the career politician, questioned Jesus not with anger, but with fascination. He asked about authority, about kingship, about truth, and Jesus replied, "My kingdom is not of this world. My power does not come from fear or armies. It comes from truth." For Pilate, this was not comfort, it was a warning. In his eyes, any power that drew followers, not through force, but through belief, was even more dangerous. If people no longer feared Caesar, if they followed truth over empire, then Rome itself was at risk. Pilate's final judgment wasn't an act of submission to the crowd. It was a message to the entire province. Rome rules here, and Rome will not be challenged. The implications are vast. If the crucifixion was primarily a political act, then the Church's portrayal of it as a purely divine event becomes more complex. In a 4th century Vatican letter attributed to Pope Damasus I, we find a chilling justification for suppressing the Pilate files. We do not protect the governor. We protect the truth upon which faith must rest. For the world needs certainty more than it needs history. Even today, the Vatican holds this line. Access to the Acta Pilati is tightly controlled. Scholars are watched. No notes allowed. Numbered reproductions permitted. Every word remains locked behind protocol under the unblinking eye of ecclesiastical authority. But the more the Church conceals, the more curious the world becomes. Why must the most important moment in Christian history be shrouded in such secrecy? What is the Vatican afraid we might see? Perhaps the answer is simple. Truth, once known, cannot be unlearned. And even if that truth doesn't destroy faith, may force us to see faith in a new light. Because history isn't made of absolutes. It's made of decisions, and the story we know is often just one version of the truth, a version chosen, preserved and protected. And yet, it is not the only one. As we close the pages of the Acta Pilati, we shift from religious politics to something even more disturbing. For deeper still, buried in the darkest corners of the Vatican archives, lie documents that have shaken even the most hardened researchers to their core. Ancient medical records. Detailed, graphic, horrifying. These aren't theological texts or philosophical musings. These are clinical, procedural accounts of live dissections, grotesque surgeries, and human experimentation conducted in the name of science and slaves, prisoners, and civilians in ancient Rome. At the center of it all is a name both revered and feared. Claudius Galenus, known to history simply as Galen, the most celebrated physician of the Roman Empire, a man whose writings shaped Western medicine for more than 1,000 years. But behind the genius was a darkness rarely spoken of. What lies next in the archives will force us to confront not just the horrors of history, but also how far humanity is willing to go. In pursuit of knowledge, Galen has long been celebrated as a genius, the father of modern medicine, revered for his pioneering insights into the human body. His name has endured across centuries as a symbol of scientific brilliance. But hidden deep within the Vatican's most secret archives lies a far darker version of Galen's legacy, a version not taught in classrooms, a version the Church has worked for centuries to keep buried. According to a little-known Greek manuscript preserved in the Vatican Library, Experimenta Anatomica, Galen and his fellow physicians conducted brutal live dissections on prisoners of war and slaves. These experiments, cloaked in the pursuit of medical understanding, were carried out in underground chambers, secret laboratories where cruelty masqueraded as science. The manuscript details these procedures with a level of clinical detachment that is deeply disturbing. Victims were bound tightly to stone tables. Some were kept fully consciously aware of what was about to happen, yet unable to move. What followed was not mere observation, it was torture. Organs were removed while the victims were still alive. Pain responses were tested. Bodies were pushed to the brink to measure endurance under unthinkable suffering. And Galen, he documented all of it. Coldly, meticulously, justifying the horror as necessary for knowledge. One particularly harrowing account describes a young slave unnamed, forgotten, whose chest cavity was opened while he remained fully conscious. Galen watched as the boy's heart and lungs moved within his ribcage. The slave's agony, recorded without emotion, was treated as nothing more than a data point. But Galen did not act alone. Vatican records describe an entire system hidden beneath the Roman Empire: underground medical schools, secret research institutes, and clandestine anatomy labs. These facilities were funded and protected by Rome's political and military elite. One such center, referred to in the archives as the Anatomica Specialists, operated in complete secrecy. Its purpose, to gather insights that could not be ethically or even legally acquired. These experiments were never meant to be public. Even in ancient Rome, the physicians knew what they were doing crossed a moral line. Only the most powerful knew of their existence. The rest of the world saw the physicians as brilliant scholars, healers, and visionaries. They lived double lives, publicly revered, privately monstrous. One document, stored under lock and key for centuries, reveals that Galen personally supervised the selection of victims, healthy prisoners of war, young men, foreigners with unusual physical traits. Each was chosen for a specific medical interest. They were not people to him. They were specimens. Another document, written in Latin and titled Liber Mortis et Dolorosa, Book of Death and Pain Catalogues. Over 300 live anatomical experiments carried out under Galen's command. Some of the notes are chillingly honest. One young physician wrote, "At first, I felt sickened by what I saw, but my heart hardened. Over time, the screams no longer meant anything. This pain served science. It served a greater glory. But perhaps the most horrifying revelation is not what was done but how those doing it thought about it. The subjects were not seen as human. They were tools, bodies, moving parts to be measured, sliced open, and tested. Compassion was irrelevant. To Galen and his colleagues, suffering was a price worth paying for truth. So why did the Vatican keep these records? Because revealing them would destroy the illusion the Church has so carefully crafted that ancient Rome, whose legacy the Church claimed to inherit, was compatible with morality, faith, and divine purpose. To expose the inhumanity of Galen and his peers would be to crack the very foundation of Western civilization, by extension, the Church itself. A 4th century letter from a bishop named Marcus Aurelius Clemens, discovered within the Vatican's sealed collections, makes the Church's anxiety painfully clear. It reads, "The horrific experiments conducted by Roman physicians, no matter how they are justified, are crimes before the eyes of God. These records must be destroyed or permanently sealed, not merely to protect the Church, but to protect the conscience of mankind." Ultimately, the Vatican did not destroy them, but they sealed them under strictest secrecy. Only a few carefully chosen scholars were ever granted access, each sworn to silence. Even then, they were allowed to see only fragments, never the full truth. The story of Galen's secret experiments is not just a lost chapter of history. It is a warning, a mirror. It reminds us that genius, untempered by morality, can become monstrous, that the pursuit of knowledge, when divorced from compassion, leads not to enlightenment but to atrocity. Galen was brilliant, but brilliance is no shield against cruelty. And now, as we move forward in an age where science advances faster than ethics can catch up, ask yourself, have we truly learned, or are we still repeating the same sins, just behind newer doors, under brighter lights, with quieter victims? The disturbing accounts of Galen's vivisections were only the beginning. Surface scratch on the monstrous undercurrent the Roman Empire fought desperately to conceal. As we descend deeper into the shadowed vaults of the Vatican archives, the air grows heavier not from dust, but from the burden of truths long buried. What we find there are records more haunting than any battlefield accounts of cultural extermination, spiritual annihilation, and systematic erasure of entire civilizations. Hidden away in a dimly lit, heavily restricted chamber lies a chilling file, labeled in Latin, Expugnatio Barbarum, the annihilation of the barbarians. This was not mere imperial rhetoric. Inside this file are confidential communiques from Roman generals, eyewitness accounts of genocide, sealed and sent directly to Rome, then locked away from the world. Their contents were never meant to be read outside the walls of power. Among the most harrowing of these is a personal report by Julius Caesar, detailing the siege and destruction of the city of Alesia. During his campaign in Gaul, his words are unflinching. "We have utterly destroyed the city. Those who survived have nothing left but to weep upon the ashes. Their temples are razed, their gods cast down, and every symbol of their past set aflame. We are not merely seizing their land, we are annihilating their memory. Rome shall be their only homeland, because no other remains." This was not chaos born in the frenzy of conquest, was policy. In a secret letter dated 52 BC, Caesar wrote with clinical precision, "Only when every trace of Gaul's past is wiped clean can we claim true victory. Every method, no matter how brutal, is justified." A century later, under Emperor Trajan, a parallel story unfolded in Dacia, present-day Romania. Trajan's campaigns, celebrated in Roman monuments, mask a much darker reality. The Vatican's sealed reports include dispatches from Trajan's commanders that speak of not only military victory, but also cultural obliteration. "We have destroyed all major temples in their capital, some as Agetus." One report from the commander of the 13th Legion reads, "All inscriptions, both stone and bronze, have been obliterated. Every text in the Dacian language has been incinerated beyond recovery. From this day forward, Dacia's memory will be what Rome allows it to be." These weren't isolated decisions. The archives contain original military maps, annotated in red ink, with shrines, temples, and cultural centers marked clearly as strategic targets. These were not battles fought only with steel. They were spiritual assassinations, designed to crush a people not just physically, but metaphysically. And perhaps the most unsettling revelation of all is this: the direct involvement of Roman priests. These were not passive spiritual observers. The clergy accompanied military campaigns not to offer prayers, but to oversee the destruction of indigenous religions. They advised which gods to defame, which scrolls to burn, and which sacred sites to desecrate. This was conquest with theological precision, war on memory, on myth, on meaning. The Vatican did not preserve these documents simply as historical curiosities. For centuries, they remained under lock and key because of the threat they posed not to the past, but to the moral foundations of the present. Western civilization has long held Rome as its cradle, the source of its laws, architecture, and ideals. But what if that cradle was built not on wisdom and progress, but on forced amnesia? A confidential letter dated to around 440 AD from Bishop Lucius Valerianus warned explicitly, "These records must never leave these walls. If the world were to learn what Rome did and what the Church inherited, it would not merely bring shame, it would unravel the very faith we have labored to build." And so, for generations, these records remained sealed, watched closely, accessed only by a handful of Vatican-sanctioned scholars under strict supervision. What they reveal is a campaign not of military conquest alone, but of psychological warfare, a total, unrelenting erasure of identity. Consider this: the Dacians once had a sophisticated writing system, old Dacian script used in everything from commerce to theology. After Trajan's campaign, that script vanished. A Roman report proudly declared, "We have succeeded. Not a single man, woman, or child remains who can read or write in the barbarian tongue. They will now speak only the language of Rome." This was not cultural assimilation. It was enforced amnesia. And the Vatican knew that unveiling such truths could shake the mythos of Roman civilization to its very core, because the Church saw itself not just as a successor to Roman power, but as its sanctified continuation. Perhaps the most chilling detail of all lies in the tone of these letters, not in what they say, but in how they say it. A Roman general, writing after the final suppression of the Gauls, stated coldly, "Our task is complete. The Gauls will never rise again. They have lost their gods, their language, and their pride. They are now Roman not by choice, but because no other identity remains. These are not the words of a liberator, nor even a conqueror. They are the words of someone who believed in the moral righteousness of obliteration. And this is the hidden history preserved in the deepest vaults of the Vatican. It is not merely a story of Rome. It is a warning, a reminder that history, when written by the victors and guarded by the powerful, becomes not a mirror but a weapon. Down a path few dare to tread lie consequences so profound they echo through the corridors of time. As we've uncovered the Vatican's most chilling secrets, Rome's silent erasure of entire cultures, we've also discovered that absolute power did not merely project outward. It often turned inward and struck at the empire's very heart. Deep within the hidden chambers of the Vatican archives, sealed behind iron doors and marked with strange, arcane symbols, exists a set of documents known only to a select few. Files so sensitive, so explosive, they have remained locked away for centuries because their contents threaten to rewrite Roman history itself. These are the Mortis Caesarum, the deaths of the Caesars. They concern the mysterious and officially natural deaths of some of Rome's most iconic emperors, Augustus, Claudius, and Caracalla. But were their deaths truly natural? Or do the archives conceal something darker, something sinister? According to these secret files, each of these rulers died not by fate, but by design. Augustus, the founder, betrayed history, tells us that Augustus, the first emperor of Rome and revered father of the empire, died peacefully in 14 AD at the age of 75. Yet the Vatican's forbidden texts tell a far different story, one of betrayal and cold ambition. In his final months, Augustus reportedly grew increasingly paranoid, suspecting that his wife, Livia Drusilla, was slowly poisoning him to guarantee her son, Tiberius, would inherit the throne. One chilling document treads, the emperor weakens. Daily, with each meal, a shadow grows behind his eyes. He suspects, and yet says nothing. Livia's hand guides everything from behind the veil. Vatican records describe symptoms eerily consistent with arsenic poisoning: unrelenting abdominal pain, vomiting, and creeping exhaustion. Another hidden letter from a close imperial official warned, "I fear for Augustus." The palace grows quieter each day. Livia moves with intention. "I believe the end has been set in motion." And then Augustus died. Just as quietly, Tiberius ascended to power, and a whisper of foul play was buried under imperial silence. Investigations were forbidden. The empress became untouchable. The image of Augustus as a noble, untouched ruler preserved. But in truth, the founder of the Roman Empire may have died at the hands of his own wife. Claudius, a murder scripted. In Mushrooms, the death of Emperor Claudius, ruler from 41 to 54 AD, has long been attributed to poisoning by his wife Agrippina, paving the way for her son Nero to take the throne. But the Vatican's archives hold something far more damning: a series of private letters exchanged between Agrippina and her inner circle that remove all doubt. In one letter, Agrippina writes, "The fungus must berari and odorless. He will eat it. The deed will be done. Let no suspicion linger. Nero must rise cleanly." The fungus in question refers to a rare, lethal mushroom known to cause death without leaving a trace. The plan was clinical, meticulously orchestrated. The poisoning occurred at a private banquet. Claudius convulsed, died swiftly, and history, once again, looked the other way. Witnesses were bribed. Servants vanished. The imperial physicians certified natural death. Nero was crowned emperor by morning. The truth, meanwhile, vanished into smoke until now. Caracalla the emperor, silenced by his own court. Then comes perhaps the most shocking of all, the assassination of Emperor Caracalla in 217 AD, according to mainstream accounts. He was killed spontaneously by a disgruntled soldier while relieving himself during a military campaign. But the Vatican files expose an altogether different story, one of premeditated regicide, orchestrated by Rome's most powerful elites. A secret memorandum between senior general states. He is mad, dangerous. If we wait, he will destroy us. All the strike must come fast, flawless, and none must survive to tell it. These documents reveal that Caracalla's murder was not the work of a lone assassin, but part of a vast conspiracy involving senior military officials and members of the imperial court. His killer, Julius Martialus, was not acting alone. He was a disposable tool chosen to take the risk and then immediately eliminated to ensure silence. Caracalla, paranoid and bloodthirsty, had become too dangerous. Those closest to him plotted his fall with surgical precision. And once he was gone, the empire quietly moved on, as it always had, leaving truth behind in the dust. Poison as policer. Roman art of assassination, perhaps the most disturbing revelations, lie in a file titled Divinicis Caesarum, on the poisonings of the Caesars. This chilling dossier lists dozens of chemical substances used routinely by Rome's court physicians and political agents, from arsenic to unknown compounds derived from plants, minerals, and animal venoms. The empire had turned poison into a political science. The archives include detailed recipes, formulas for crafting undetectable toxins, and protocols for disguising symptoms. Physicians are described as artists of death, capable of staging mortal illness with such brilliance that no accusation could stick. A single drop mixed into wine, a powder slipped into a fig, a salve placed on a ring, all silent, all irreversible. Why has the Vatican kept this secret? Why would the Vatican, a religious institution, preserve such deadly knowledge and then conceal it? Because to reveal it would unravel everything. It would destroy the myth of Rome as a beacon of order, law, and moral civilization. And worse still, it would undermine the Vatican's own inheritance, the narrative that its moral authority descends from Rome's divine legacy. A confidential letter from the 6th century, stored deep within the archives, speaks to this fear. Should these accounts ever find light, the public will question everything. We are heirs to a legacy of murder. Justice and morality will be revealed as masks. Rome was not only an empire, it was a symbol of law, of structure, of civilization itself. But beneath its marble statues and triumphant arches, the real Rome may have been something else entirely. A theater of quiet murders, hidden ambitions, and power secured not by glory, but by poison. And the Vatican has kept that truth locked away until now. We cannot allow history to remember Rome as a place riddled with ruthless conspiracies and imperial assassinations. This chilling sentiment, echoed in countless confidential documents buried within the Vatican archives, explains why the Church has kept these records sealed, accessible only to a select few historians, each sworn to strict silence. those permitted entry must take a binding oath of secrecy, promising never to disclose what they read, transcribe, or even glimpse. But among the most guarded files lies a category of immense historical consequence. Assassination records from the Roman Empire and the Church's long campaign to bury them. A striking letter dated to the 17th century, written by a senior cardinal, commands in unequivocal Latin, "Under no circumstances are any documents concerning the assassinations of the Caesars to leave the Holy See. Any individual attempting to disclose these secrets shall be permanently excommunicated and punished by any means necessary." This isn't merely clerical. Caution, it is evidence of centuries-long intent to suppress a volatile truth that the Vatican knew too well the political dangers of Rome's darker legacies. Because history, the Vatican understands better than most, is not just a record of what occurred. It is a carefully constructed narrative of what we choose to remember and what we decide to forget. From the blood-soaked marble of Roman palaces, where emperors were poisoned, stabbed, or suffocated in their sleep, we now descend into a deeper, more subtle realm of power, one not wielded by the sword, but by the cross, religion, and at the very center of this transformation stands a set of secret letters known only to a few as the Epistolae Constantini, the letters of Constantine. This hidden correspondence between Emperor Constantine and key bishops of the early 4th century paints a radically different picture from the one taught in most textbooks. Far from a pious convert, Constantine emerges as a cold strategist, a ruler who saw in Christianity not salvation but opportunity. In one extraordinary letter dated 313 AD, addressed to Bishop Eusebius, Constantine writes bluntly, "I have little interest in theological disputes, but I see clearly that this faith offers more power to unify my people than any legion I command. Assist me in stabilizing the empire, and I shall raise your church above all others." What's remarkable is not just the political calculation, but the clarity with which Constantine identifies Christianity as a tool of imperial governance, a system of belief more effective in controlling public sentiment than brute force. This alone explains why the Vatican has never allowed these letters to reach the public eye. Because they challenge the central myth that Constantine adopted Christianity purely out of spiritual conviction. Instead, they expose a calculated bargain, one that would ultimately reshape Western civilization. At the heart of this bargain was the Council of Nicaea in 325 AD, officially. It was convened to settle theological debates tearing through early Christianity. But the secret Vatican letters tell a very different story. Nicaea was not a theological forum, it was a political summit, one orchestrated to impose a single imperial version of Christian truth. In a private communiqué written shortly before the council, Constantine warns his closest aides, if Christianity is to become the foundation of our empire, the bishops must leave this council united. Any sign of division will be taken as weakness. You are authorized to apply pressure by any means necessary. That pressure came swiftly. Internal documents labeled Acta Secreta Nicaea reveal that bishops were threatened with expulsion, exile, or even political persecution if they resisted. The emperor's chosen doctrine. One such record quotes a participant. The emperor's command was unmistakable. Those who refused to endorse the final creed were to be declared enemies of the empire. We had no choice. From that council emerged the Nicene Creed, the bedrock of mainstream Christianity. But the most consequential decision made in those marble halls has remained hidden for centuries. The official compilation of the Bible, according to confidential records preserved deep within the Vatican. Constantine and his theological advisors selected which texts would define Christianity and which would be erased from memory. This wasn't about spiritual authenticity, it was about control. A bishop present at the council wrote in a private note, "We excluded many writings, not because they were false, but because they were dangerous. If the people read them, they would begin to question not only the Church, but Rome itself." Among the discarded were texts that offered radically different visions of Jesus' teachings, gospels that emphasized inner revelation over institutional abstinence and love over law. The Gospel of Mary, which elevated a woman as a teacher equal to the male apostles. The Gospel of Thomas, which claimed the kingdom of God resided within, rendering church hierarchy irrelevant. And the Gospel of Judas, which turned betrayal into divine obedience, undermining the very foundation of Christian morality. In a shadowy side meeting during the council, it lined in fragments from Acta Secreta Nicena, Constantine and his bishops debated these texts explicitly. One entry reads, "His Majesty was clear. Any book that promotes rebellion, challenges imperial rule, or suggests a truth outside Roman authority must be eliminated. The goal is not absolute truth, it is lasting unity." This was the moment when Scripture became strategy, when sacred text became imperial law. For over 1,700 years, the Vatican has concealed these revelations, not merely to preserve spiritual authority, but to protect the fragile scaffolding of history itself. Because once these truths emerge about the political engineering of the Bible, the silenced voices of early Christians, and the empire's manipulation of belief, the entire foundation of Western religious identity trembles. And so, the Vatican archives remain sealed, not to protect the faithful, but to protect the myth. Long before Constantine seized the imperial throne, there existed a range of gospel texts widely circulated among early Christian communities, texts that urged believers not toward obedience to external authority, but toward the discovery of divine truth within themselves. These gospels, deeply introspective and spiritually radical, were seen as subversive, and for that very reason, they were deliberately excluded from the official biblical canon, according to highly restricted documents buried within the Vatican Secret Archives. The primary motive behind their removal was political. Constantine, determined to unify the fractious Roman Empire under a single doctrine, recognized that a religion centered on inner revelation was incompatible with centralized rule. Instead, he and his appointed advisors engineered a version of Christianity that emphasized hierarchy, obedience, and submission not only to God, but implicitly to the emperor and to Rome itself. One of the most revealing documents is a private letter from Constantine to Bishop Eusebius of Caesarea, the man he entrusted with organizing the new sacred texts. The emperor writes, with unmistakable clarity, "I require a clear and unified Bible, leaving no room for doubt about authority and obedience. The people must understand their position in our social order and never question my authority or that of the Church." These words, never intended for public eyes, raise a profound and disturbing question. Is the Bible we know today truly a divinely preserved revelation? Or is it the result of deliberate imperial negotiations, strategic choices made to solidify power and eliminate spiritual ambiguity? That unsettling question is precisely why the Vatican has gone to such extraordinary lengths to conceal these materials for nearly 2,000 years. Another classified Vatican record, dated to the 9th century, quotes a high-ranking bishop as saying, "If the truth about how the Bible was constructed were ever revealed, the faith of every believer, would be shaken to its core. We are not merely protecting the Church, we are safeguarding the very structure of civilization. To this day, the Vatican strictly limits access to these sensitive texts. Scholars who are granted entry into the deepest levels of the Apostolic Archive must agree to a severe oath of silence. Disclosure, even in the mildest form, results in immediate expulsion and potential excommunication. The stakes are that high. But it's not only Christianity's origins that the Vatican has chosen to hide. Deeper within the underground vaults of the archive lies a remarkable and largely unknown collection titled Mythologia Imperialis, or Imperial Mythology. This specialized corpus contains some of the earliest and most unaltered versions of ancient Roman myths, and what they reveal is nothing short of astonishing. These ancient manuscripts expose a systematic and deliberate campaign beginning with the reign of Augustus to reshape Roman mythology into a powerful political tool. Far from being harmless tales about gods and heroes, these stories were gradually weaponized to reinforce the divine authority of emperors. In a confidential letter preserved in the Mythologia Imperialis, Augustus writes to his trusted advisor, Marcus Agrippa, "We must ensure that people believe I have been chosen by the gods. Let our myths be rewritten it. One must glorify divine power vested in me." It was not simply propaganda, it was mythological engineering. Take, for instance, the story of Romulus and Remus, the older version still preserved in a restricted Vatican manuscript presence, the twin brothers not as divine figures, but as representations of balance and duality, embodying the republican ideal of shared governance. But in the revised version, Augustus approved, Remus is erased, and Romulus becomes the lone founder of Rome, sanctified, violent, and chosen by Mars himself. Annotations written by imperial editors confirm this transformation. One marginal note in Latin reads, "The emperor wishes it made clear that Mars aided Romulus." Passages contradicting this must be altered or removed entirely, and this pattern continued for generations. Under emperors like Nero, Domitian, and especially Commodus, mythological revisions intensified. Secret letters housed in the Vatican archives reveal that Commodus went so far as to declare himself the living incarnation of Hercules. He commissioned a new set of myths in which every heroic deed attributed to Hercules was subtly altered to reflect his own supposed greatness. In one chilling directive to his editors, Hecamans ensure that when the people read of Hercules, they see me. I am Rome's strength. I am its divine right. Yet, remarkably, the Vatican did not destroy the older versions. Instead, it concealed them tucked away in a classified chamber deeper than any other, a section reserved only for the most dangerous texts. These original manuscripts threaten not only to unravel the myth of divine emperors, but also to challenge our entire understanding of Roman civilization. Texts like the Liber Antiquus Romanis, written in the 2nd century BCE, portray a world strikingly different from the imperial narrative. Heroes are flawed but human. Myths center around balance, humility, and communal values, not domination, not divinity, and certainly not blind allegiance to a single man. This original mythology celebrated complexity, morality, and civic virtue. It was the soul of the old republic, later overwritten by those who sought to turn myth into monarchy. That the Vatican has kept these manuscripts hidden for so long reveals their explosive potential. If these suppressed stories were made public, if people realized that both the Bible and the mythologies that shaped Western civilization were strategically manipulated, the resulting crisis of faith would not be limited to religion. It would ripple across law, government, and culture. We would have to ask, how much of what we believe was ever really true? And perhaps that is the most carefully guarded secret of all. It states, "No emperor shall rise without the whisper of the council. The voice of the people is theater. The true command flows from the chamber of Saturn." This chamber, according to restricted Vatican diagrams, was a hidden underground vault beneath the Temple of Saturn in the Roman Forum, long thought to be a mere treasury. In truth, this site was a nerve center where Saturnalia members convened, where torches cast shadows on walls etched with encoded decrees and ancient pledges. These rituals, often conducted under the winter solstice moon, were not simply symbolic. They were binding oaths carried forward through generations. Some of the documents go even further, suggesting that the council saw themselves not merely as political puppeteers, but as spiritual intermediaries, guardians of a divine pattern hidden within time. They believed Rome's destiny wasn't just about conquest and territory, but about fulfilling a cosmic design that could only be read through these mysterious maps and celestial alignments. But what's even more unsettling is that fragments of correspondence between early church fathers and surviving Saturnalian members suggest that the church did not destroy this secret society, absorbed it. An internal Vatican memorandum from the 10th century speaks cryptically of preserving the wisdom of Saturn beneath the cross, so that order may continue unbroken. This suggests a quiet continuity, that the same elite who once controlled emperors from the shadows may have simply changed their robes, adapting to the rise of Christianity and embedding themselves within the church's inner workings. And here lies the most explosive implication of all. If the Saturnalia Council and its sacred maps truly influenced the rise and fall of emperors and directed imperial policy and then quietly integrated into the Vatican, then the real power behind Rome was never just the Senate, emperors, or even the Church as we know it today. It was this silent force, a brotherhood of elite strategists, mystics, and manipulators operating across centuries under different guises, but with the same goal: total control over truth, time, and destiny. The Origen's Fabulum texts challenged divine perfection. The Acta Saturnali revealed political deception, but hidden even deeper than both are the maps. Maps not drawn to scale. Maps are not made for travel. Maps were meant to instruct the elite on how to shape reality itself, and the Vatican, fully aware of the power within these scrolls and charts, has locked them away under 24-hour armed surveillance in the Archivum Prohibitum, accessible only to the Pope and a council of 12 unnamed archivists sworn to lifelong silence. There is a reason you've never heard of these records. There is a reason modern scholars dare not speak of them publicly. And there is a reason the Vatican still, in the age of satellites and supercomputers, refuses to digitize these ancient maps, because they are not just relics of the past, they are manuals for control. And if released, they wouldn't just change our understanding of Roman mythology or imperial politics, they would unravel the very story of Western civilization, exposing a chilling possibility that for 2,000 years the world has been following a script written not in history books, but in secret chambers beneath Rome. We never openly choose the emperor. That decision is made from the shadows. The successor is always selected by this council. Task is not to rule openly, but to ensure the public believes every transition of power occurs naturally, divinely, that the gods themselves, not men like us, have chosen their leader. Among the most chilling revelations buried in these ancient records is the mention of a mysterious figure known only as Pater Saturnalist, the father of the Saturnalia. According to confidential reports, the Saturnalist was not merely the leader of this secretive society. He was regarded as the keeper of Rome's destiny. His identity has never been disclosed in any official text, and the Vatican, it maintains absolute silence. Strict secrecy surrounds every trace of his existence. But what truly disturbed the Church about the Saturnalia society was not just its staggering influence on Roman history. It was their clandestine nighttime rituals, rites that defied the moral and spiritual order the Church would later impose. Hidden Vatican files describe these ceremonies as being conducted in complete darkness, participants masked, robed in silence, surrounded by esoteric symbols. They performed symbolic animal sacrifices, not for bloodlust, but to decide Rome's future. One classified document, penned by a Roman priest in the 5th century, is particularly explicit. During the rites of Sotelia, cryptic prophecies were recited. Symbolic patterns were drawn across forbidden maps. Decisions were made decisions. No emperor dared challenge, because they all knew the truth. Real power did not rest on the throne. It rested far beneath it, in the ancient dark chambers where these secret councils convened. This revelation leads us to a disturbing question. Do we truly understand the history of ancient Rome? Or have we been shown only a carefully curated version, one shaped by those who held the power behind closed doors? And what of the secrets still buried in the Vatican archives? Secrets not even the most determined historians have been permitted to touch. The documents suggest that the Saturnalia society didn't simply disappear with the fall of Rome. On the contrary, reports from the 6th and 7th centuries imply that the society continued operating, hidden and undisturbed, even as the Roman Empire fractured and faded from the world stage. The Church has been relentless in preserving this silence, not out of respect, but out of fear. Because the exposure of such a secretive and influential group operating in Rome's darkest corridors would profoundly damage the Church's spiritual and historical legitimacy. An internal Vatican memorandum from the 14th century puts it bluntly. We must never allow the world to know that Rome's sovereignty and, therefore our own, was once manipulated by unseen figures cloaked in shadow. Should these records ever surface, the damage to our authority would be irreparable. And that is why the Vatican doesn't simply hide these documents. It guards them with obsessive oversight. Those granted access undergo exhaustive vetting. They swear oaths of silence. They enter the archives not as scholars, but as initiates. But the most haunting revelations of all may not lie in ritual descriptions or forbidden names. They lie in the maps. Ancient maps. Hidden maps. Keys to an unknown Rome. Secured deep in the Vatican's most heavily restricted vaults are the tabulae obscura, the shadow maps. These are not conventional Roman maps, charting legions and borders. They depict something far stranger, a Rome the world was never meant to see. A 4th century cleric, Lucius Rufinus, captured his awe in a secret journal. When I first laid eyes upon those maps, I could scarcely believe them. They portrayed another Rome, a Rome beneath Rome, interwoven with secret roads, holy sites, and entrances no common man would ever find. These maps document not only secret roads, but also underground cities, sacred places deliberately erased from public history. They mark the locations of lost temples, buried artifacts, and forbidden knowledge. One document, titled Invenarium Thesarorum, Inventory of Treasures, catalogues treasures concealed in remote and hidden sanctuaries. reachable only through these secret routes. But one entry stands out: the mysterious underground city known only as Roma Secunda, the Second Rome. It appears in no public record. Not a single historian or emperor has ever acknowledged its existence. And yet, within the Vatican archives, Roma Secunda is vividly described: a city carved beneath the foundations of Rome, built in darkness, constructed by order of imperial and priestly elites to store the most dangerous truths of the empire. Forbidden manuscripts, lost relics, vanished prophecies, and secrets capable of rewriting everything we know about history. These are not dusty relics of a forgotten age. These maps are keys, and in the wrong hands, they could unearth a version of history the Church has spent centuries keeping buried. A 15th century scholar, Alejandro Diana, shared his findings only in a personal journal, one never intended to be seen. As I traced the markings on the tabula secunda, I felt unease. The roads lead to places I had never heard of, names lost to history, and some roads went not forward, but downward. They led beneath catacombs, beneath palaces, into chambers where no record dared shine light. There were symbols, some resembling pagan runes, others older, untranslatable. I saw gateways drawn. Gateways, I believe, to the true heart of Rome. And what lay in that heart? One final map, preserved under armed guard and never published, is labeled simply Tabula Secunda, Rome, the second map of Rome. It reads: "This hidden city lies beneath the very streets of the eternal city. Constructed entirely in darkness, it houses the sacred and the forbidden. Only the most trusted imperial guardians were ever permitted to enter." But the most chilling detail: Roma Secunda was not merely a vault. It was a temple, a library, and a court of judgment where the empire's highest secrets were preserved and reviewed by an unseen hand. Was this city ever truly abandoned? Or, as some Vatican documents darkly suggest, does someone still guard it? And if they do, what are they protecting? It was, in truth, the real center of power in ancient Rome, not the Senate, not the palaces, not even the emperor's throne. This center was hidden, known only to a carefully selected few. Its authority was so absolute that even the most powerful emperors were forced to quietly submit to it. A confidential record from the era of Constantine makes the hierarchy clear. Even the emperor must understand that Rome's true power does not reside in palaces or upon thrones. It lies deep beneath the city, where the keepers of secrets and guardians of treasure control every critical decision. So what exactly are the Vatican archives still concealing about these ancient maps? And why, after so many centuries, are they still forbidden to the world? A classified 17th century letter from a senior Vatican cleric provides a haunting explanation. If these maps were ever to fall into the wrong hands, the world as we know it would change forever. Behind each secret route lies knowledge humanity has never been prepared to confront. We do not hide these maps merely to protect the Church. We do it to shield mankind from truths it cannot yet comprehend or control. But there's more. The Vatican fully understands that revealing the existence of a hidden Rome would trigger questions that challenge the very foundation of Western history itself. What if what we call history is just the surface? A fragile narrative concealing something much older, deeper, and darker. An 18th century classified report written by a Vatican cardinal puts it plainly. The Second Rome does not merely house physical treasures. It preserves knowledge. Humanity is not yet ready to face truths about the nature of power. the real past of mankind, and secrets capable of throwing the world into chaos. This is why the Vatican Archives are not simply a repository of documents, they are a fortress of control. Scholars fortunate enough to be granted access must undergo stringent background checks, operate under tight surveillance, and navigate within strict boundaries. Every movement is watched, every page turned is monitored. The deeper they go, the less they are allowed to speak. Our journey into the secret past of the Roman Empire, buried under centuries of silence, leads us to one undeniable conclusion. The history we've inherited is not the full story. The textbooks, official records, and sanitized timelines are not a mirror of truth. They are a carefully edited script, curated by those in power to preserve their legacy, their structure, and their control. From Nero's fire to the shadowy networks of secret societies and forbidden maps, the message is clear. Real power is never fully visible. It thrives in darkness, in what is hidden, silenced, and redacted. The Roman Empire did not only conquer with armies, it conquered with narratives. It edited myths. It rewrote sacred texts. It buried inconvenient truths beneath stone, silence, and secrecy. Because true power is not just about commanding armies or lands, it's about controlling memory, belief, and what humanity is even allowed to know. The Vatican Archives are the ultimate symbol of this invisible power, where truth is treated not as a gift to humanity, but as a volatile asset, too dangerous to be released. They do not merely preserve history, they manage it. They protect, regulate, and at times conceal it, not only to protect the Church, but to maintain a global structure they believe the world is not yet prepared to unravel. But the question now is, are we ready? Are we, in this age of science, global consciousness, and rapid progress, truly prepared to face the darkness within our civilization's foundations? Do we possess the moral courage to confront our deepest historical secrets, to admit that the world we take pride in may have been built on manipulated truths? Maybe these buried secrets are exactly what we need, not to destroy our understanding of history, but to complete it. Because only by facing Thedek can we begin to recognize the light. History is not a simple record of events. It is a living reminder that truth is always layered, sometimes hidden, sometimes dangerous, but always worth seeking. And within that dangerous pursuit lies our greatest strength: humility, awareness, and the willingness to question everything. This exploration of the Vatican's forbidden past is not meant to breed mistrust, it is meant to awaken responsibility, to remind us that every civilization must be brave enough to look inward and face the shadows that shaped it. And as we close this chapter, one question lingers in the silence. Are we truly ready to know the full truth? Subscribe to Secret Historian, uncover what was never meant to be found. Forgotten cities, forbidden texts, and silent powers that shape the world from the shadows. If history has a hidden side, we're the ones reading it. Subscribe now, watch carefully, question everything.